We were all over the place.
Yeah.
Even for us, we were all over the place.
Covering a lot of important ground involving dogs and leather and televisions. I don't know.
All right, let's start with some follow-up. Stuart Hay had a lot of information on chroma subsampling, and I can try to make my way through this, John, but I have a feeling you're better suited for this one.
No, you got to do it. You can do it. This was about the naming. We were saying, why is it called 422444? Like the explanation in the Artings thing didn't make any sense. So Stuart Hay explained it, but you can read through it.
Oh, it's just super. Okay, well, here we go.
I believe in you.
Thanks.
I cut it down to what I think are the essentials.
All right.
I have my doubts.
Yeah, seriously. All right, well, anyway, here we go. So, and by the way, all this snark has nothing to do with you, Stuart. Your feedback was excellent. It's all with me dreading having to make my way through all of this terminology. So here we go. Buckle up. Stuart writes, I've enjoyed a little trip down memory lane to my training as a broadcast engineer while listening to your discussion around chroma subsampling and felt the article you linked to, although informative, was missing the reference back to the original ITU-R BT.601 standard, which may answer why we ended up with the 4:4:4 terminology used to describe chroma subsampling.
I'm going to say you just say 444 for that one.
Yep.
Well, I'm just trying to establish. Can you give me play in the space, people? Play in the space.
Well,
we
did like YCBCR last time, right? I think it's like 444, 422, 411. I think it's the nomenclature.
Do you want to do this?
And I think like for the other ones, you can just do Y and CB and CR. Don't worry about the primes.
I feel like a married couple. Is this my story or yours, John?
Keep going. Did you watch Encanto as well? I feel like they
I
shouldn't
did,
have used
actually.
I feel like they shouldn't have used that joke twice in the song. Yes, I understand the end of the song. They're just re-summarizing all the things they said earlier, but I still feel like it would have been stronger just to use it once. Anyway, go on.
It was very good, by the way. I extracted the below from the Tektronix glossary, which I found useful throughout my career. 422, the numbers 422 denote the ratio of sampling frequencies of the single luminance channel to the two color difference channels. For every 4 luminance samples, there are 2 samples of each color difference channel, hence 422.
All right, so before you go on, like this is a piece of historic information that I think we were missing, that this nomenclature comes from the pre-digital days, and that based on this sentence here, the way they did things in the analog world was to have a luminance channel and then 2 color difference channels. I'm assuming like they split up the color signal and made 2 things, so when you combine them, you get the color back out. I don't know the exact details, but the point is that there was 2 color difference channels and 1 luminance channel. That's why you end up with the 3 numbers, despite what we're talking about is luminance and chroma, which is just 2 things. So that was enlightening for me, and that starts to make a lot more sense. How that relates to digital is a little bit weird, but it's, for broadcast stuff, I can imagine it's like, for historical reasons, back in the day, we transmitted the information over analog wires in this way, and that's why it's 3 numbers.
411. 411 indicates that Y has been sampled at 13.5 megahertz, while CB and CR were each sampled at 3.375 megahertz. Thus, for every 4 samples of Y, there is 1 sample each of CB and CR. 420, a sampling system used to digitize the luminance and color difference components Y, RY, and BY of a video signal. The 4 represents the 13.5 megahertz sampling frequency of Y, while the RY and BY are sampled at 6.75 megahertz, effectively between every other line only.
So what we learned is that analog ruins everything by making it weird and complicated, and then we went to digital. We got saddled with a lot of the same terminology.
That's a pretty fair summary, actually.
About right.
Yep. All right, moving right along. But thank you, by the way, to Stuart Hay for that feedback. Moving right along, Hyper has released a new Thunderbolt 4 hub. Additionally, a turntable dock, which I thought was quite funny, but that's actually not what we're trying to talk about. The turntable dock is designed so you can put a new iMac on it, and you can then spin the iMac left and right in order to show like a coworker or what have you. But anyway, what we're interested in is their Thunderbolt dock. And reading from Mac Rumors, at CES, Hyper announced what it claims is the first Thunderbolt 4 hub with an integrated 100-watt. How do you pronounce this? Is it GAN? What is it?
I go with GAN. That's how I read it in my head.
That's how the Anchor CEO pronounced it on a podcast interview.
What is it, like gallium
nitride or something like that?
Thank you. Power supply. The hub features 1 Thunderbolt 4 upstream port and 3 Thunderbolt 4 downstream ports. So this is very similar to the dock that I have that I'm using that I've already forgotten the name of, which I like. However, I am really into, no sarcasm, the 100-watt power supply thing because what does the 14-inch take? It takes like 60, 70 watts, something like that?
65, something like that. And then, the 16 takes, I think, 95 or 100.
I think that's right. Somewhere in that neck of the woods. So this would be able to power, one of these new MacBook Pros much more effectively, which is super neat.
That's not the big selling point. The big selling point is no giant power brick.
Yeah, that's why it's a giant dock. But yeah, this is because as far as I can tell, this is basically the same guts, like the same functionality, the same ports and how they are split up as many of these other docks that we've mentioned recently that many companies are making for around the same price point. But this is nice because it is, first of all, providing 100 watts of power, which many of them don't. I believe the CalDigit one, I think, is 60 watts. The OWC one, I think, is 85 or 90, something like that. So, this might be the highest power that's being provided by this whole category of products. So if you happen to be plugging in like a 16-inch MacBook Pro and you actually run it hard enough to need that kind of power all the time, which I run mine with the XDR's power, and I believe the XDR only powers up to something like 85 watts. And it's never been an issue because I'm not like encoding video 24/7. But if you need that, or if you prefer the internal power supply and not having some giant power brick like I did, I would definitely prefer, this looks pretty good. So good for them. I'm glad that somebody got the memo that, hey, not everything has to be a tiny little box for product marketing shots and this giant black power brick somewhere on the cable, to outsource the problem so that they don't show up in your marketing shots.
Look at this thing I just put in the chat. I was looking at Hyper's website, and they have this other product, which looks a lot like the kind of like the things we got for our laptops at work. It's got an HDMI on the side of it, and then USB stuff or whatever. But look what it's got on top.
Whoa!
Play, pause.
It's media
back
keys.
And forward.
Yeah. Play, seek back, and seek forward. This is only for iPads.
No, this is like for look at. Well, yeah, I guess it's
for iPad. It says.
Does it not work on laptop? I mean, obviously on laptops you have these keys on your keyboard. Now they're actual real physical keys too, right?
The side of it that the USB-C connector is on is molded to fit a modern iPad. But if you look at the 1, 2, 3, fourth image down, it says extension cable for universal compatibility. So in case you don't want to plug it in directly to an iPad, then you can use this little 2 or 3 inch little jumper cable, if you will, in order to plug it into a regular computer.
So I guess it probably just simulates keyboard commands for the media controls.
I guess.
Yeah, I imagine. But when you have it on the side of an iPad, the play button points upwards, and the back and previous are up and down.
I mean, in all fairness, almost any iPad accessory makes it or itself look sideways at some point. There's just no getting around that.
Yeah. Anyway, I thought it was interesting.
That is neat.
I will say it is quite an ugly setup. When you scroll down and you see the one where the iPad has the cable sticking out, what is now the top port on this thing, it says get phenomenal 4K video. You see
that is weird.
Can you? Oh man, this is part of the problem with any kind of bolt-on accessory or dongle kind of thing for any of you get these great computing devices like an iPad or an iPhone, and then now I want to add this functionality to it, and then you have to have this giant clunky thing, and there's wires everywhere all of a sudden, and you start to, again, it's just like the power supply thing. You start to lose the appeal of the marketing photos very quickly.
Spoilers for 6 Colors Apple yearly report thing that I just filled out and sent to Jason today. But one of my comments about the iPad was basically now that the MacBook Pros got their ports back, maybe it's time to reconsider whether the iPad Pro should have more than one port on it. Because hey, it is Pro and they're pretty big, and the one port they have is like a Thunderbolt-y USB-C type thing, but really just one on the Pro product. There's room for more, and that could save you from at least some of this mess.
Yeah, although, I mean, honestly, having Thunderbolt on there on the most recent ones is great because then you can just use one of these hubs if you need to. But yeah, obviously, it's much better to have, built-in ports, as I've always argued, because first of all, they're free. It's a lot of people will excuse the lack of some kind of port by saying, "Oh, it's fine, just buy a dongle." But you don't consider the cost of dongles. These Thunderbolt expansion dongles are $200, and for a lot of people, that's a significant investment for something that they think should probably be built into the product. But then you also have to carry it. You got to plug it in somehow. You got to power them. It's a big thing to have them built in. So
yeah, obviously they're not free when they're on the iPad, and then it costs more to manufacture them, and so on and so forth. But we're not saying hey, you should have HDMI and SD card slot and 5 USB-A or whatever. We're just saying maybe how about 2 Thunderbolt ports, one maybe 3. On all 3 sides, It's just rethinking whether 1 is the right number especially for the really gigantic, 13-inch or whatever it is, iPad Pro. Maybe 1 or 2, 1 or 2 also very small Thunderbolt ports would be appropriate for a device at that price and capability.
Do you think, though, I mean, I don't want to start a thing with the iPad people, but like, do you think anybody's using the port for more?
Well, that gets into your story from the previous week about like how terrible iPad OS is at taking advantage of the stuff that's in there. So like, it's got the same M1 chip as the Macs, right? But the Macs are just so much more capable, and it's not because the hardware is less capable. The hardware on the iPad is great. It's because the OS is cranky about just doing what you would expect a computer to do when you plug in a storage peripheral. And again, it's not like Apple doesn't have an OS that understands how to deal with external storage. Like it's the hardware is limiting it a little bit, and then you only got the one port, but acting like it's an iPad from, what year did the iPad come out?
2010.
2020, yeah. It's not 2010 anymore. The iPad is so much more powerful and capable. It's an amazing machine. Still just got the one little dinky little port on it. And then on top of that, the OS, even though it's making moves in the right direction, is so slow to just sort of let us do what we know the hardware can do.
Yeah, I don't know. I still, I mean, again, I don't want to get into a thing, but I think Apple really still hasn't found like where the iPad Pro is supposed to be, what it's supposed to really be able to do software-wise, hardware-wise. It's very capable, and this, we've been saying this for years. Everyone's been saying this for years. Like the iPad hardware seems to be way over-provisioned for the software's actual needs and actual usage and limitations, and that iPad power users for years have said, "Hey, this hardware is great. Please make the software, allow us to do more things, or make it more pro-friendly in some way." And it just seems like that whole dream really kind of fizzled out a lot over the last couple of years with the massive improvement happening in the MacBook line with the switch to the M1. And I know a lot of iPad people have recently switched back, to MacBook Airs or something, and are very happy there. And I wonder, like, if the whole iPad Pro project or initiative maybe is not panning out.
I mean, I think it's working fine. They're just going slowly. But I think the match in hardware, now that it's M1, just like the Macs, just really highlights like we don't, like, iPad OS doesn't need all that baggage it used to have because iPads were obviously less than Macs. Like all the stuff about like, oh, we can't have too many background processes and we're going to kill your thing as soon as you add a memory, and don't use too much CPU and don't do it's like you could, I know they're not exact matches now, but you could introduce an iPad Pro that has the same amount of RAM and the same system on a chip as a MacBook Air or even a low-end MacBook Pro in the case of the big thing, right? And then what's your excuse? Why are all those limitations there in iOS? And some of the limitations are there for safety, sandboxing, and having APIs that can't do weird things, and security. Like, I understand all that. Keep all the good stuff. But all of the rest of the things about, we don't want you to see too many apps on the screen at once because it could be too confusing, and, that we have really limited multitasking, and we don't want you to be able to arbitrarily place things and don't have too many floating things, and don't have many programs running at once, and only give yourself limited time in the background, and the OS will kill you your app. Like, those type of limitations make less and less sense when you have when you could have essentially identical hardware in a low-end to mid-range Mac and the high-end iPad. And that's before we get to the stuff of like, why is the Files app so cranky, right? Like, why did it not read Marco's card, but the Mac did? There's nothing about that reading external storage in a sane way. No feature that we like about the iPad, the simplicity, the security, the sandboxing or whatever, none of that precludes doing a better job at what Marco was trying to do with external storage on these Pro products. And none of it precludes having one or two more ports either. Like, you can do all of that. It's just the OS doesn't seem like it's caught up. It's like when a teenager grows real fast and their sort of brain doesn't keep up with the new size of their body and they become awkward and bump into things. That's like what the iPad Pro is.
Yeah, and it's wonderfully capable. The hardware is amazing, and the software can be amazing for certain use profiles. But it just seems like they have had a lot of trouble expanding what those use profiles are, like expanding the number of people who can and are willing to easily get their work done on iPads. It seems like that, like, if you're one of the people who fits into it, it's great. But that number of people seems to have a lot of trouble expanding.
Like, think about the use case that we always hear about because we're podcasters and we know a bunch of podcasters. Doing podcast recording on an iPad. You can do it, but it's way more difficult than it should be. And there's nothing about podcast recording that should be a challenge to iPad Pro hardware in the slightest. It is all software limitations. Apple could address that use case. That should be one of their test cases. Can you do audio production, both the editing of it, which is getting much better with the new apps that are out now, but also the recording of it? The limitations of the iPad doesn't have great ports for that. There's no way at the OS level to have the kind of control over streams of audio from different apps that the Mac has, and there's no way for third parties to introduce that. So basically people are, stuck. It's like, why do you have to use a Mac to record your podcast? Because it's just so much more of a pain on the iPad. It's so much more limiting on the iPad, and it doesn't have to be. But so far, Apple has not addressed that use case at the OS level or at the hardware level. And it's a shame because the hardware, in terms of, how strenuous would it be to stream something over Zoom at the same time as you're recording it into two different files and formats that you care about at the same time as you have a soundboard hooked in or whatever. The iPad hardware can do that, no problem. It's not like it's going to choke on the audio streams. It would barely break a sweat. But the software support just isn't there.
I think your analogy of a teenager growing too quickly is really apt, because I feel like, and this, all of us have said this many times, so I'm trying not to repeat myself too much here, but I feel like the foundations of iPad OS, while not bad by any stretch of the imagination, I think the foundation's getting a little creaky because so many things have been bolted onto the side of it. And I cannot tell you the amount of times that I'm browsing in Safari and I go to do a right to left swipe to, what is that, going forward again? I always get it. Going forward on Safari. And next thing I know, I have a slide over app coming in from the right-hand side of the screen, which is arguably the gesture that the iPad thinks I want, but it is certainly not the gesture I actually want. And because there's no real equivalent for a mouse, again, the trackpad on the Magic Keyboard notwithstanding, you can't assume that there's always a mouse connected. And so all these things have to be done with gestures, but there's only so many ways to gesture on a single rectangular screen. And I just feel like I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you about doing audio production on an iPad, but thinking about how to manage, microphones and connectivity, and the thought of doing something like with loopback, which presumably wouldn't be possible, where you're creating virtual microphones and things like that. Like, the thought of managing all that in iPad OS makes me want to cry, whereas managing that in Mac OS is mostly okay. And it makes me want to cry both as a user and a developer, like putting myself in Apple's shoes. Like, how do you manage that? Like, what is a not crummy user interface for that, especially since an iPad is supposed to go from a completely casual user to from my grandmother to Federico Vitici. It's supposed to span that whole range. And it's actually in some ways the same problem that Swift is running into, and that Swift fancies itself being able to be a learning language and being able to be like a firmware low-level language, but that is such a wide swath of problems to solve, and there's so many trade-offs involved that someone's getting screwed no matter how you slice it. There's a really good tweet that you retweeted from _David Smith, the Apple employee David Smith, that talks about this. If I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes. But anyway, it's just so much to ask the iPad to do, and I agree, hardware-wise, it's not a problem, but software-wise, it is so much that I can't fathom, and this is why I don't work at Apple, I can't fathom how to make that livable.
Well, and I think it covers the simpler end of the spectrum of needs, the always example of I have this non-technical friend or relative and they have an iPad and they love it and it's their only computer and it's freeing them to do whatever. That's real and that's big, that. And I would say that's probably the majority of the iPad usage that I see in the quote real world. Anecdotally, when I see who's using iPads around me or out there, or, outside of my immediate tech bubble, and it's not nerds. It's usually people for whom that is their primary computing device, maybe secondary to their phone, but it's people who don't use a laptop or desktop computer routinely. That is their laptop or desktop computer, and for that role, it does very, very well, and it has for a decade. That's great. It's how you get the higher end of usage. Most iPad Pros that I see were bought because at the time they were sold, they were the biggest iPad, they still are, but so it was bought more for size or for one of their hardware capabilities, like the pencil support or something like that, rather than I need this to be really fast and to have a Thunderbolt port and plug in, my mixer or whatever that. I see that way less, and maybe that's just the people I'm hanging out with, or the people that I hear from or whatever, but it seems like, the iPad, even from its entire existence, the iPad has always covered, the the simpler end of needs very, very well, in many ways better than desktop and laptop computers do. But it's like, how do you broaden that to cover more productivity needs, high-end needs? And they've tried a bunch of different things, I think, with mixed success. Some of the areas that they have gone in the pro direction, they've done very well in, but it seems like there's, like, if I can characterize it always kind of feels like in my mind kind of like a city of very tall skyscrapers, and it's like you have all these, like, you know, a skyscraper is basically like a very tall walled garden. If you're in one of these use cases, you can go, the sky's the limit, you can go great. But as soon as you try to, like, step out of it a little bit, or if your needs are not quite in the square peg hole or whatever, like, I know I'm mixing a lot of metaphors here. Forgive me, I'm tired. But if your needs fall a little bit out of the norm or out of what Apple considered or designed for, you hit a wall. You just can't do that on the iPad. Or jumping over that wall is a ridiculous amount of effort that, you really would take a Federico, or somebody on that level to actually overcome. And that it's that characteristic of the kinds of barriers you run into on iPad OS and how hard you hit them and how few options you often have to go around them. That, I think, is where people run into so much trouble and frustration trying to get it to do, slightly out of bounds things.
I think Apple's close, though. Like, they're creeping up on it. They haven't found it yet, mostly because they're resisting the urge to just put Windows on it, not like Microsoft Windows, but like the actual interface element of Windows. But just to give people an example of like what we're all doing on our Macs as we speak here now, like whenever we record a podcast, we've got our show notes open. It's a Google Doc, so it's in a web browser and it's in a tab. We've got something recording our audio. For me, it's Audio Hijack, which is recording my audio, and sometimes into multiple files, depending on how we care. It lets you either record a single file or multiple files with different tracks or all sorts of stuff like that. Of course, we're running Zoom. It's what we're using for the live, not live stream, but like that's what goes on to the live stream is our Zoom conversation, because it has a higher quality than Skype. We're also in the chat room that we refer to. It's an IRC channel, and we have an IRC client that we're running on our screens. And then if we ever go to a link or something, we say, hey, check out this link, and we'll open another browser tab or another browser window to look at the link we're discussing. Or if I say I put something in the Slack, then we hop over to Slack and see that. But in general, on the screen at the same time, we're able to see our audio recording, our show notes, maybe a web page, and IRC. Already, we've pushed past the limits of what you can reasonably do on even the biggest iPad. Not because of the hardware limitations. It's a 13-inch screen. The power of the system on a chip is entirely there. All of those capabilities are there. But just because the iPad is like, no, you can't. I'm sorry, you can't do that many things at once. And honestly, it's not that many things, right? It's a web page, a tiny window with an IRC channel, and we can look at our levels in the little recorder. I don't even really need to look at the Zoom window, although I do like to have it there because I can hit the little mute button that's on the Zoom thing when I cough or whatever, right? This is not like, oh, I need system hacks and extensions, and like loopback is not involved. Now granted, Audio Hijack that we're using to record does have a system extension thing that lets it do that, but this is why Apple should build this into the OS. What does Apple need to do this on the iPad? They need a system level service where it says, hey, do you want raw access to the audio streams flying through iOS? Here's a public API for you to use. Maybe Rogue Amoeba wouldn't jump on it because they really hate Apple's usual limitations, but if they just made a thing for that, third parties will fill that gap. We have a choice of IRC client. We have a choice of what we want to use for our communication. We use Skype, now we're using Zoom. Choice of web browser, Google Docs, other type of document. Those choices exist on iPad OS and on iOS. The only thing that doesn't exist is, hey, hardware that's totally capable of doing this, can I sort of do all those things at once? It's like, yeah, I hope you like swiping. It's not... They're so close, right? And again, we're not asking for, I need command line access and no sandboxing and total free for all. No, you do not, like, to do what we're doing now. The iPad is very close to allowing that, but it's far enough away that it's really annoying to do that. So much so that when any of our podcaster friends need to record a podcast, they usually turn to a Mac to do it.
I'm not sure we're as close as you think we are, because on the Mac, you just mentioned, many of us use Audio Hijack. Audio Hijack relies on a system extension, as you said, and you just can't do that on iOS. There's lots of security and policy, App Store policy reasons why you just can't do anything like that on iOS, and that's the kind of thing like I can't see Apple ever adding that on iOS, because if you think about, not only would you need some kind of, again, Apple approved method of controlling and intercepting the audio of other apps, which I know they have Audio Bus. That's a very different thing. This is like apps that have not opted into this system can have their audio captured or rerouted by this program. There's no way Apple would ever allow that on iOS. If Apple made any new system, any new platform Apple makes from now in the future, will never allow something like that to be done by apps.
I don't know that they would never do it, because I feel like if it's a sort of opt-in dual handshake, the two applications have to mutually agree that they allow it to happen. Like, the only way you can do this right is at the OS level, because you're never going to allow it a system extension like they do on the Mac. So Apple has to do it, and Apple can do it in a way that's secure.
Oh, they could, yeah. I mean, it could be very similar to, like, the Mac permission dialogues that say, like, do you want to allow this app to control your screen?
Oh, please, make it better than that.
Well,
we can do better than that.
That's true.
We can do so much better. But I'm saying, like, make it have dual handshake. Not only does one app have to request it, but then the other have to receive it. Just make a better UI to that. Like, by all means, it can be as sort of... technically, it can be as cumbersome as you want. I'm just arguing for less cumbersome. But the number of steps required can be the same. Two-way handshake, double confirmation, explicit connection between two apps. Because for our situation, it's not like we need arbitrary apps every week. We know the apps that are going to be involved. And if we change our mind and use a different thing, we'll just re-handshake those. Like, this is all possible. Like, and the main thing I was trying to get at is, it's nice to be able to see all these things at once. And even on a 13-inch screen, even if you have to make the windows small, just talking to Jason in Slack because he's listening to this thing live, my IRC window for looking at the chat room is tiny. Even on my XDR, I could make it a lot bigger, but I don't. Like, I don't need to see thousands of lines of everything. Same thing with the show notes. I don't need to see the entire document. It's way too long for that. I just need to see a little bit. And for the audio hijack, I make the window as small as I can. I wish I could make it smaller. I think I complained to Paul about that one, but I wish I could make my audio hijack window even smaller, because I just want to see the levels meter and see that it's recording and maybe see the time, right? This fits on a 13-inch screen, provided you can use the amazing technology that we call lowercase w Windows. iPad OS isn't there yet. I'm not saying it necessarily needs to go there, but the current system of slidey things plus maybe a floater here and there is not adequate for being able to do this. And then, like I said, then there's a thing of like, oh, I want to look at a web page. Now do I lose everything? How do I get back to it? I don't know how close we are, because like Casey said, what is the solution? It's not super obvious. I'm like, you should do exactly this thing, make everybody happy. That's not clear, because unless your answer is just make it like a Mac, and in which case, why even have the iPad exist? I don't say just make it like a Mac. We've got Macs for that. But I think there is a way to get from where we are now to something closer to the capabilities of a low-end small Mac.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe the way it is now with all these limitations is the best balance, because, the answer to many of these things is, well, if you need to do that, I guess you should just get a Mac. You're right. That is kind of a crappy answer to give somebody, but what if that's true? Like, all of the reasons why people love iPads, many of those depend on the extreme software limitations that it has. I think what we've seen with iPad multitasking over the years is it's been a really bumpy road trying to expand the iPad software capabilities into something that works more like a laptop in those kind of more power usery ways of we're trying to keep the iPad exactly as great as it is. We're trying to lose none of the greatness, none of the simplicity, but add complexity without losing any of the simplicity. And I think what we've seen over the history of multitasking so far is that it basically has failed at doing that. That iPad multitasking, I think, has largely been a failure in the sense that it hasn't been very easy for people to figure out, and it has made the simplicity of the iPad less so and less successful, because many people accidentally invoke multitasking gestures and then can't figure out how to fix them and stuff like that. So when the iPad, right before the iPad came out, there were heavy rumors that Apple was doing a tablet. Tablets were like the cool thing at that moment. Like that was like the hot thing, and everyone in tech was like, tablets are the future. But nerds like us were writing blog posts and stuff saying, okay, tablets are interesting maybe, but how are we going to solve the text input problem? Tablets, historically, the few that had come out before that, like they always kind of had weird, not very good text input. And there's not really a good way to have a physical keyboard with a tablet unless you make some giant like flip around thing. And Well, on-screen keyboards or handwriting recognition or voice control or something, those are all possibilities, but they all have very strong limitations. And when Apple was rumored to be making a tablet, everyone's like, oh, this is going to be great. And everyone kind of thought that like somehow they would have some idea that would somehow break through that text input barrier and would somehow be amazing. And the iPad came out and it just didn't. It didn't break through the text input barrier. It just supported whatever awkward method you wanted to use and figured, well, we'll kick this can down the road and see if we ever come up with anything better. But for now, we're just going to stick with the weird balance of options we have, and you're going to find ways that you love this thing anyway. Maybe that's what multitasking is. And maybe that's what a lot of this Pro feature wanting will end up being, where like we keep thinking like, oh, they have to somehow figure out a way to keep every bit of the simplicity and security and all that stuff, and yet somehow add all this power to it. And maybe the answer is they can't do that, and they shouldn't do that. Maybe the answer is if you actually want to do those more powerful things, the Mac is probably what you should be using.
I think it's definitely possible, like because they're so close. Like I agree with you that they screwed it up. Like I think they tried too hard to be different and simple, and in the end made something that's actually more complicated in terms of the multitasking. We've discussed this a lot in the past. It's mostly because they didn't want to just do the obvious thing. But I think, speaking of text input, sometimes the obvious thing is pointing you in the right direction. Eventually, they did just make a flippy keyboard, and you know what? People loved it. Like, that's the obvious solution. Hey, how do we deal with text input? What if I had a keyboard attached? Oh, I don't want a keyboard attached. That makes it more like a laptop, a weird floppy laptop. People love it, right? Cursor support. How long did they fight against? No, there's no cursor on the iPad. What are you talking about? It's direct manipulation, as discussed on previous episodes, right? I touch with my finger. There's no cursor. They added cursor support. They did it in an iPad-y way, and people love it. And cursor support and keyboard support does not take away from the simplicity of the iPad. If you give someone an iPad without a keyboard, they'll never need to know about cursor support. They'll never need to deal with a floppy keyboard. They'll just use the on-screen thing. Like, I think it is possible. Again, we're not saying you have to be able to do everything you do on a Mac Pro on an iPad. We're just saying, can we get close to the use cases that would fit on like a MacBook Air? And I think we can. Apple just hasn't yet. And there are lots of barriers, as Jason's pointing out in the chat room here. He's the fourth member of the show this week. Some of the stuff that Apple is doing, like with the quick notes and the floating windows, right? It's like, oh, those might be useful elements, but they're only Apple, and third parties can't add them, or they're very limited, or Apple only wants you to float certain things. I saw it recently. What was it? Somebody had like, they turned sort of basically the Now Playing widget into a floating thing. Like they made like a video player app that shows a Now Playing interface on it or whatever, because they just wanted to have a floating thing that showed the currently playing music, so they could have like a window on screen all the time with their music controls on it. I'm surprised they didn't get rejected from the App Store saying, no, that's only supposed to be for playing video. I don't want you cheating with the playing video so you can show a useful thing like music controls. I guess you got to get one of those dongles.
Yeah, I'm shocked that was allowed, by the way.
We'll totally it's probably torn down from the store by the time this episode's released. But what Apple wants you to do, I guess, is buy that dongle from Hyper with the physical media buttons on it or something. Like, I think we're close, and I don't think it's unplausible. I think you can add this functionality without making the iPad more complicated. Again, we're not saying you need command line, root access, kernel extensions, complete, like, you know, any of that.
Wait, hold on. By the way, you do need command line. It can just be in its own little sandbox, but command line is actually really nice and really important to lots of people.
You know what I mean? Like non-CH rooted, like non-sandbox, you know, complete, like you don't need all that stuff. You can to get back to the Pearl thing that I think I quoted last week, make easy things easy and make hard things possible, right? And we're not saying make hard things like as easy as they are on the Mac. The Mac makes lots of easy things kind of hard and makes really hard things possible. I don't know, like it's if you could draw a little overlapping thing, the iPad expands from very, very simple up to about the amount of complexity that you'd manage to tackle on a small Mac laptop. This is setting aside my continued hobby horse of like the drafting table iPad that's the size of an XDR but lays down on your table, in which case at that point maybe you should, you know, make hard things not just possible but extremely possible. Anyway, this is supposed to be follow-up item. We went off on a long iPad tangent, but I think Apple is traveling down this road. They're just going more slowly than we'd all like.
All right, two things. That drafting table thing would ruin your neck and back. And secondly, is there a way to disable Quick Note on the Mac?
Wait, why would it ruin your neck and back? Drafting tables are not a new technology. They've existed for like literally centuries. And I don't think they're ergonomically perfect, but they're not so terrible, or at least not any more terrible than using a mouse and a keyboard. Centuries of humans did tons of work for hours and hours. Monks are illuminating manuscripts at drafting table type things. I don't think they're ergonomically that terrible. You can have a bad one, you can have a good one, but mice and keyboards probably caused more widespread RSI than monks at drafting tables ever experienced.
I by maybe like cumulative total, but I don't think per capita.
Per capita, I don't know. All I'm saying is it's not ridiculous. You can have a drafting table type setup that is, especially if you're doing like fine art types things. Like the artists choose to work on an easel and not like direct manipulation of what's on their canvas. And the easel is kind of slanted. Like the whole point of a drafting table type setup, kind of like the Microsoft one, is you can sort of choose the angle and position. You have to find a setup that works for you. You could be standing or sitting. It's not. Again, it can. If you just chucked it on someone's computer desk, maybe it wouldn't fit right. But like any new sort of ergonomic setup, you'll have to adjust to it. Just like people have to adjust to standing desks. How should they work? Where should the keyboard and mouse be? Where should the monitor be when I'm at my standing desk versus my sitting desk? I think it could work.
By the way, quick real-time follow-up from non-rev guy in the chat. You can disable Quick Note on the Mac. It's apparently just implemented as a hot corner. So if you go into System Preferences, Desktops and Screensaver, go to Hot Corners, it's just preset as the bottom right corner. And so you can just turn that off.
I've forgotten it was on the Mac because I have never seen it. And I would have disabled it immediately if it did.
Yeah, it keeps like popping up whenever I hit that corner with the mouse.
Which corner is it by default?
Bottom
Lower right?
Bottom right, yeah.
Yeah, no, I've already got that set to something.
Yep, same.
Okay, yeah, see, mine was just nothing, so maybe it overrode it if it was nothing. But yeah, I'm very happy to lose that feature.
Lower right should be show desktop. It's really handy. Everybody try it.
No, it's not show desktop. It's turn your monitors off.
No, that's upper right because any old school Mac user knows upper right is activate after dark or whatever your screensaver is.
We are sponsored this week by Linode, my favorite place to run servers. Visit linode.com/ATP to see for yourself. You can see why Linode has been voted the top infrastructure as a service provider by both G2 and TrustRadius. And if I gave out such an award, I would give it to them too, because I love Linode. I've been a customer there for a very long time, many years, and I run something like 25 servers there, and lots of things. The entire Overcast backend, a couple of like test servers, the ATP site and its whole membership thing. All of that is hosted on Linode. And it's easy to see why. They have award-winning support 24/7, 365 to every level of user, no matter how much money you spend with them. It's easy to use, easy to set up. Their resource levels are extremely competitive. They have very specialized needs if you need them. So if you need like a high GPU plan or high compute plan or a GPU compute plan or a high memory plan, all of that stuff is possible on Linode, and it's just everything you would want out of a modern host. It's well designed, the control panel is nice, there's an API, there's a whole bunch of other tools like a block storage offering, a backup offering, load balancers. There's so much at Linode, and it's all at an incredible value. I know, that's why I picked it a long time ago, because I knew this stuff adds up over time. You're paying per month for servers. Price matters a lot, and Linode has been the best value in the business I have seen since the entire time I've been with them. Linode makes cloud computing fast, simple, and affordable, so you can focus on your projects, not your infrastructure. Visit linode.com/ATP and create a free account right now, and you get $100 in credit. Once again, that's linode.com/ATP, and new accounts get $100 in credit. Thank you so much to Linode for being an amazing host for running all of my servers and for sponsoring our show.
Very quickly before we leave the iPad topic, I would like to say, because I feel like this may come across negative if you're not really listening to what we're saying, but all three of us are really enthusiastic about the future of the iPad and how it could end up so much better. Well, I think the two of us at least, in that it could be a really phenomenal computing platform. I mean, it is already a phenomenal computing platform, and I would hope and I would encourage the listener to realize that we're not. I mean, it may sound like we're complaining, but I actually don't think we are. We're trying to figure out a way to make it better because it's so great and it has so much potential. And I'd also like to quickly point out that I have not bought an iPad since when Michaela was barely like 6 or 7 months old, because the last iPad I bought was the iPad Pro from 2018 with the new form Apple Pencil at the time and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the first 11-inch with USB-C. That's the same one I'm using still.
Yeah, and it still runs great. Like it's running better 3 years on than I think any other iPad I've ever owned. And although, in a perfect world I'd love to upgrade it, I don't have any pressing need to upgrade it. And a lot of people, particularly those who don't particularly care for Apple, really like to say that Apple believes in planned obsolescence and they deliberately make everything run like crap so you get new stuff. And who knows, maybe that's true, but I don't think it is. And this, almost 4-year-old iPad is running great to this day. I still use it all the time.
Well, yeah, me too. And I don't use it much anymore ever since I did the upstairs laptop, but I really enjoyed for many, many years having that just always in the kitchen, ready to go. And the problem is, like, as we talked about, like, the hardware is so over provisioned. Like, the reason I bought the iPad Pro was I wanted the pencil support for like doodling and stuff and diagramming for quick things. And I wanted a really good 4-speaker system. I couldn't care less how fast it is, because what I do on the iPad Pro is like play podcasts and type into Apple Notes when I remember I need something on my shopping list. Like, that's next time I go to the store, better get more milk. I'll go to my iPad, type that in, and add it to my list. Like, that's the kind of usage I have, and so that's why I can use one from 2018 and it doesn't even feel slow. The battery's not what it used to be anymore, but I can plug it in frequently anyway, and that's fine. And frankly, though, my usage of it has gone down so much since I decided to just have a laptop in that role that I don't know if I would replace it if it broke. Or I certainly, if I were to replace it, I would replace it with probably an iPad Air, maybe even the base model if it uses USB-C by then. I don't need that advanced function, and I think that's been a problem for the iPad since day one. Of like, what most people do with it is pretty computationally easy. And so there really hasn't been a lot of drive for people to upgrade their iPads unless it changed some other factor, or unless their old one broke. I think I'm very optimistic that the iPad has a clear future, but I think the iPad's future is largely going to be what the present is. I don't see it expanding significantly from where it is now, because I don't see that as being the right tool for the job, for the jobs that it currently today doesn't do well or doesn't do easily. That's where, like, I see it being a very good product line for the indefinite future, but not a particularly expanding one.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back to follow-up. How long is that?
40 minutes later.
Good grief. All right, moving right along, or something like that. We were talking about, I think this was in the context of John, your son, doing development in writing his own apps. We were talking about setting up an Apple Watch for development, which is everyone's favorite thing to see in Xcode. And Marco and I immediately said, reboot everything. But Andy Norman pointed out, make sure you've looked at the watch and noticed if it's asking to trust the Mac. It took me a couple of attempts before I noticed that. I didn't realize that was something that could interrupt this whole process. I'm going to have to pay close attention now.
Oh, that's the worst. Because so when the first time you connect a watch to, or the first time you plug in your phone in development mode with a watch paired to it, and I think it resets every major OS version, and of course if you restore either device, the first time on the phone it will say trust this computer, and you got to hit trust and enter your passcode. It'll do the same thing on the watch if there's a watch paired to that phone, and if you either miss that or if you dismiss that dialog, it won't show again until I think you reboot at least the watch, if not both devices. And if you miss that, this is correct. Like, everything will just not work, and it's kind of hard to figure out why.
Yeah, it'll just spin, and it will not tell you why it's failing. And in the case of my son's thing, it stopped him from deploying to his iPhone. He couldn't deploy his app to his iPhone. He said, I'll deploy it to your iPhone just as soon as I get this watch set up, and it would just never finish. And so, yeah, we had the process of rebooting and trying everything again. Eventually, we saw that dialog. I forgot to mention it last week. I just didn't want people to get stuck and not understand why they couldn't progress. Reboot everything, try again, make sure the watch is close by, that it's charged, it's in proximity. I had him put the watch on his wrist just because I'm like, maybe it doesn't like being on the charger. I was trying to do everything to say, everybody's cool, we're all near each other, we're starting this whole thing over, and then you have to watch for that little thing to pop up and then make sure you tap the right thing on it.
Indeed. We got some recommendations for slideshow apps to fix Marco's problems. All of them will go away if you just use the right app, right, Marco?
Yeah, and I've been keeping track of them and of what people have said. I've shown Tiff a few of the options. But yeah, so basically, by far, the most recommended option is an app called Photo-Magico, which we're probably going to try out when we make the next slideshow. A few other people recommended that we just use iMovie or Final Cut Pro. The reason why I think we didn't jump to that, and I should let Tiff talk about this at some point, but the reason why we didn't jump to that is because iMovie had really good, or not iMovie, well, back in the day maybe, but Photos, previously iPhoto, has really good templates where you can just kind of select a whole bunch of photos and just say, here, just make something using these, and then I'll adjust if I want to. And it will do things like multiple photos on screen at once and have them like flip around in custom ways and blend into each other, but like in like a tile arrangement, or have them appear as though they're in like one of those flipping photo album books. So it's that kind of wonderful, friendly consumer template for photo slideshows that shows more than one photo on screen at once. That's the kind of thing that's hard to find a replacement for, or at least a good replacement for. And Photo-Magico I don't even think does that necessarily, but that seems to be the highest recommended thing for this. A few other options, people also recommended something called Adobe Premiere Rush, which I haven't tried yet, but we do have the Adobe, all the crap subscription that, we pay absurdly for it, because it actually makes sense for us to do that for, barely for other reasons. But so I will probably try that as well. So we'll see. I will follow up next time we have to make one of these.
I think what you want is what they call motion graphics, another, I think, term that comes from the analog age that is weird. It's like, oh, you want things to move? You need motion. That's why Apple's app was called Motion. It did motion graphics. Anyway, I think Photo-Magico does multiple images, but it maybe doesn't do all the themes and stuff. When you were saying the images floating around, it was making me think of two things. One, iDVD had menus that were like that. Like I remember doing a baby thing when Alex was a baby, but it was like a mobile, like that you put over a baby's crib, and that was like the menu. But then in the mobile, you'd have little thumbnails of movies playing. Like it was a template that you threw it in there. Like it's basically motion graphics that look really cool and professional. That only thing you add to it is your movies get displayed here, and it'll play a little music or whatever. Same things for slideshows. And the second thing it made me think of is that the screensaver I use on all of our computers it's called, what is it called? Floating? It's a theme for Apple's like show photos from my photos app thing. Let me just pull it up here. Yeah. Screensaver. It's a top left screensaver. It's called Floating. And it shows just a bunch of floating images. And you can tell it to pull images from a folder full of images, or you can tell it to pick an album from your photo library. It gets angry when you have hundreds of thousands of photos in your photo library, but you can eventually hook it up. Of course, because Apple doesn't understand families, the only person who can use that screensaver connected to the actual Photos library is my wife, because she owns the Photos library. But what I've done to work around that is periodically I just go to the Photos library and I do a full export of all of my favorites into a folder, redundantly storing them as just a bunch of JPEGs in a folder, and then I point the screensaver at the folder instead of the library. Smart. But anyway, the reason I bring this up is this whole screensaver, the one that shows a bunch of your images, totally broke in Monterey. Like Monterey, the original version that was released 12.0 and 12.0.1, this would just show a black screen and never show an image. But it was fixed in 12.1, so I'm happy to have my screensaver back. It took me, I didn't notice until I read about it on the internet, because I also have my screen like go to sleep. It's like, if you leave my computer idle or you lock the screen by chucking your cursor to the upper right corner, it's supposed to turn on the screensaver, but then shortly afterward, it will go totally black and turn off the monitor. So I never even noticed it was broken. I should have thought, you haven't seen the screensaver run in a while, because normally you chuck the cursor and you just leave, and then by the time I come back, the screen's black. I'm like, oh, it probably went to sleep, right? But no, it was just totally broken. It was some weird OpenGL thing. I don't even know. But anyway, it's fixed now. And that reminded me of what you were thinking of, which is like, I have a bunch of images and I want to show them in some cool way as like a bunch of photographs that are being thrown onto like a virtual table, or as tiles that flip around, or as floating things. And the screensaver has many different versions of that. I wonder if these are all like Quartz Composer things, and that's why they can't port them. But it seems like Apple somewhere,
interesting,
at the very least, has a lot of these themes already done. It's just they may be in some legacy technology that they can't easily port to iMovie or Photos or whatever.
We are brought to you this week by Iodyne, introducing the all-new All-SSD Pro Data. It's the fastest Thunderbolt storage for M1 Macs. Conventional storage forces a trade-off between big, slow hard disks or small, fast SSDs. And without redundancy, your data isn't protected. Now, with Pro Data, Iodyne is delivering revolutionary storage for pro desktops and workgroups. ProData is the first all-SSD Thunderbolt RAID device that combines 12 NVMe SSDs and 8 Thunderbolt ports into a single elegant form factor. ProData is incredibly powerful, with storage performance up to 5 gigs per second. For the first time, multiple Thunderbolt connections can be combined to boost performance using Iodyne's breakthrough Thunderbolt NVMe multipathing. And all your digital assets are seamlessly protected with transactional RAID 6, checksums, and enterprise-grade encryption. ProData features a sleek industrial design that fits as well in a laptop bag or DIT cart as it does on your desk. It's shipping now in 12 and 24 terabyte capacities, up to 3 times the size of the largest built-in Mac SSDs. And with the flexibility of Thunderbolt daisy chaining, many ProData devices can be connected to a single Mac for nearly infinite expansion. ProData even supports connecting up to 4 computers simultaneously to one ProData, dividing its unique SSD storage pool into distinct containers with configurable passwords, encryption keys, RAID levels, and file system formats. Using Iodyne's storage handoff technology, containers can be handed off in real time between collaborating Macs with just one click. Supercharge your setup with the fastest Thunderbolt storage for M1 Macs and the fastest Thunderbolt RAID array, Iodyne ProData. To learn more, visit iodyne.com. That's IODYNE, iodyne.com. Thank you so much to Iodyne for sponsoring our show.
Canon's flagship DSLR line will end with the EOS 1D X10 Mark III eventually, maybe.
I'm going to say EOS, not EOS.
Sorry, this is not my world.
You don't know the Canon EOS? They had a big marketing campaign when you were a teenager.
Okay.
Because obviously we would have been paying attention to that then.
Yeah,
exactly.
Totally were, Canon EOS. Anyway, I just brought this up just because I think we talked about it on a past show and I think a lot of people are confused. I think I pointed this out once before. I think when we were talking about Casey was told the story about being in Disneyland and all the photographers have a fancy DSLR they take your pictures of. And I was like, well, they have a fancy camera, maybe not necessarily a DSLR because DSLRs are kind of old and creaky. And I think when people hear DSLR, they think big digital camera, but that's not what they should think. SLR doesn't just mean big digital camera. It means a single lens reflex. Is that what SLR stands for, Mario?
Yes, it is a type of camera.
Right, and it's got a flappy mirror inside it. Then when you take a picture, a mirror physically moves out of the way to allow light to hit the sensor, and then the mirror flaps back down. And it is a setup that has mostly been supplanted by what they call mirrorless cameras, which are so weird. They're defined by the thing that they don't have. Mirrorless cameras work like you would imagine if you just started in the digital ages. There's a sensor, and there's a thing that opens to let light hit the sensor, and a thing that closes that stops light. And by the way, they even have ones that you can use electronic shutter where it just stays open all the time and just use electronics to record the image or whatever. But no more flappy mirror, which has pros and cons, but in general, the market in the world has decided that the advantages of mirrorless far outweigh any disadvantages of you not being able to look through the lens of your camera with a prism and all this other crap that you can do with an SLR, right? So mirrorless is one. Even the standard bearers for SLRs and DSLRs, Canon and I imagine Nikon will follow. And I don't think Sony has any SLRs right now, or if they do, they're very obscure. The DSLRs are going away, but that does not mean big digital cameras are going away. They're just all going to be quote-unquote mirrorless cameras. So nobody freak out. It's not as if we're all going to have to use iPhones from now on. If you like interchangeable lens, fancy digital cameras, rest assured, there'll still be a couple of companies willing to sell you some for the price of a car.
Well, and keep in mind also what this news item actually is. Many people interpreted this to mean Canon is not going to make DSLRs anymore. That's not what this is. Canon makes many lines of DSLRs. The very, very, very top of the line one is the 1DX series. That is what they are saying they're not going to make any more of after this current one.
I think the writing's on the wall for the rest of them, though, too. Like, it's just starts from the top. Like, you can read the quote from the CEO. Market needs are rapidly moving towards mirrorless cameras, so accordingly, we're increasingly moving people in that direction. You're right, it's not a definitive statement, but this is the way the world's going. And just to describe why mirrorless is winning, the big giant mirror that flaps up takes up a lot of room. It's like a little periscope type thing where the light has to go in, then it has to bounce off the mirror, then it goes up to the little prism, then it comes out the little eyepiece, which lets you essentially look with your eyeball optically through the lens that is going to take the picture, which has lots of cool advantages to it. But it takes up a lot of room. Mirrorless cameras are just smaller because you don't need room for the mirror. You don't need to flap the mirror up and down. You can do shutters. You can do mechanical shutters much faster, and then you can do electronic shutters. You can't do an electronic shutter if the mirror's in the way, because when the mirror is there and you're looking through the eyepiece, the sensor can't see anything because the mirror is blocking it. And when the mirror flaps up, now your eye can't see anything, so it's blacked out briefly. So the mirrorless mode is just this sort of more straightforward way to get light directly onto the sensor. And, and it's like, well, how did they do the eyepiece? Well, they have a digital thing where you're seeing a readout from the lens. Like, it's taken a long time for digital cameras to get close to the performance of a DSLR, but now they're getting in the ballpark. So the DSLRs are slowly being phased out just because mirrorless are smaller. So this doesn't mean the complete end of all of them tomorrow, but it seems this is sort of the company signaling we're going in the, kind of like all car makers are going in the direction of electric. It's going to be years and years before the internal combustion cars are gone, but every single car maker has said, we're kind of planning to go all electric, and they put all these fantasy dates. We'll be all electric by 2030, 2035, 2040. We'll see if they hit those dates, but they've all announced plans, and this is essentially Canon saying, yeah, the SLRs are probably going away.
Yeah, and this, because they're acting like their highest end one. I mean, I'm sure there's many reasons for that. First of all, I don't think the 1DX series has been selling in great volume recently, but also, I'm sure there's much stronger competition from mirrorless cameras at that segment as well. But also, the reason this is significant, even though they didn't mention, for instance, the 5D series, which is still extremely popular, although I think that is also, the writing's on the wall, I think, for that as well. But that's very popular in different markets. But the reason this is big news is that even though Canon's not saying we're getting rid of all of our DSLRs, to axe the flagship one, and from Canon of all companies, like Canon has probably been the most successful DSLR company by probably a pretty big margin, especially at the higher end. So for them to axe it is as significant as like if BMW said, all right, all M cars from now on are going to be all electric.
Or Ford said they're no longer making cars, which they said several years ago. And by that, I mean they're just making trucks and SUVs, which, by the way, in case you didn't know, Ford hasn't made a quote-unquote car in, 3 years now?
Did anybody notice?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Most people don't realize it was, hey, Ford, they make like pickup trucks and SUVs, right? They make cars too, right? And most people would say yes. And I'd say, okay, name a 2022 model of Ford that's not an SUV or a truck. And you can't, because there isn't one, because they don't make
Mustang.
No, it's not a car. If you looked at it, it's the Mach-E.
Isn't that an SUV now?
No, it's the Mustang Mach-E.
Isn't it like a crossover?
He's talking about like the GT3.
I'm just being a turd because your point is completely fair.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think what is the latest model year of the Mustang?
I think that they're still making them, as far as I know.
They make the flat plane crank one, but the point is that's not a new car that was developed for 2022. It's a car that they developed and they continue to sell. And I guess they make new model years each year with different trim levels and stuff like that. But yeah.
To go back a step, I don't think of it as a car, John. I think of it as a horseless carriage. Mm-hmm. It's a mirrorless camera and a horseless
crossover. They're not station wagons. They're crossovers.
Indeed. Also, I would like to slightly real time follow up and correct you. I would not talk about going to Disneyland. I go to the one real Disney park.
I know, Disney World. I'm sorry. Yes, I agree with you on this 100%, even though I've never actually been to Disneyland. But come on, just look at the maps, people.
Right? Disneyland is like 1/100th of Disney World. I understand it's the OG. It doesn't matter.
But no Epcot. Epcot is is unsurprisingly my favorite part.
Of course. Well, I mean, it's most people. It's a
it's
lot
the
of people's
nerdiest
favorite
part.
That's without doubt. Anyway, all right. So we should probably try to squeeze in a topic or two before we jump to AskATP. So, John, you would like to get on your soapbox about new TV stuff at CES?
Soapbox. This is just exciting news.
Okay.
I just we don't talk too much about this on the show, other than me hemming and hawing about what TV I'm not going to buy. So I feel bad I feel bad that we hadn't talked about this years and years ago, because
the story is old as podcasting.
Yeah, this is not like a new technology. Like when I was looking for like explainer videos. Figure out we gotta have links to the show notes to explain some of this stuff, and all the explainer videos I would find were like 6 years old. So this is not new technology, but the news at CES related to television is that someone has actually shipped a television with this technology in it, which we thought was coming, and there's some interesting stuff about who is shipping it. But anyway, the technology is QD-OLED, which stands for quantum.OLED. A brief review of television technologies. Most people probably have at this point flat panel LCD televisions, which use a technology similar to what is in most of our Mac screens or computer monitors. There's a backlight that shines light, usually white light, out. And then there's a bunch of little pixels in front using liquid crystals that have red, green, and blue subpixels that turn on and off and allow varying amounts of light through. So when they're all open, you get red, green, and blue filters with the white backlight shining through them, and red, green, and blue combined to your eyes make one white pixel. And when you turn the shutters all the way off, it tries to block all of the backlight light. The ones in fancier screens, like the ones on the Mac, on Pro Display XDR and the MacBook Pros, and the fancy iPad, are called Mini LED. And what they do is, instead of having one giant white backlight, they have a bunch of smaller white backlights, like 2,000 of them. And instead of the white backlight being on all the time, it's only on behind the pixels that need to light up. So if you make the screen all black, they just turn off all the black lights. That gives you better blacks. And if you have some part of the screen that's light and some part of the screen that's dark, they just turn on some of the backlights. Obviously, there's a problem called blooming, where the backlights are not the same size as the pixels. So if you have, like, say, a starry night where it's a black sky with a pinpricks of light, there's no pinprick backlight. So they have to turn on like a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter backlight behind the pinprick star. And LCD shutters are not that great at blocking the light. So you'll see a little bit of a halo glow around the light when really you should just see one pinprick of light. But anyway, that's LCD technology. And you often see it described as an LED TV. That's just referring to the backlight. The backlights of these televisions are LEDs instead of being the cold cathodes or whatever they were before. But it's still a liquid crystal display in the front controlling the shutters, right? So the best TV technology for many years has been OLED, which stands for Organic Light Emitting Diode, where there's no backlight. There is no big white light behind a series of filters. Instead, every single pixel emits its own light. And so you can turn on and off individual pixels. Our iPhones have OLED screens, right? So when you do an iPhone, and you want to make it a starry night on the iPhone where it's all black with pinpricks of light, all it does is turn on the individual pixels that are the stars. So there's no halo effect on them, whatever. Problems with OLED is they can't get as bright because LED backlights can get super duper bright. And then OLEDs have burn-in problems if you do make them super bright, and OLEDs also wear out. There's a bunch of limits of OLEDs. But in general, for televisions, the best TVs you can get are OLED because it is much, much better on a television to be able to control the individual pixels. It's just a shame they can't get quite as bright. Televisions has another problem with the brightness thing is, if you're looking at it in a well-lit room or whatever, it has to be brighter than, a little phone screen or whatever. So most modern OLED televisions are actually WRGB, which is they have RGB subpixels, and then they have a big honking white subpixel. And that's just to boost the brightness, right? So they mix in white, like an actual white light, with the colors. And as you can imagine, they can wash them out. A lot of it is there, like if you want to make the screen entirely white, you use mostly the white subpixels, but that's called a WRGB OLED. And all the best televisions use that right now. The only company in the world that makes a WRGB OLED for televisions is LG. And they make it for everybody. Anybody who has an OLED television as of before CES 2022, that's an LG panel in there. So Sony's television, Panasonic's television, Philips, like Sharp, they're all LG OLEDs in there. But OLED is the best in town because you can control the individual pixels, but it doesn't get as bright. So finally, QD-OLEDs is let's take OLED TVs, which is the best available thing, and let's fix some of their problems. Their main problem is they can't get as bright, right? So what can we do to help with that? The way OLEDs actually work is they don't have, you can do this with OLEDs, but they don't do it for expense reasons. They don't have a red, green, and a blue subpixel, or even a white subpixel. What they have are individual pixels that are bigger than, I think they're bigger than the 3 red, green, and blue. But anyway, they have individual pixels that just emit blue light. That's what, they're still individually controlled, but every individual pixel is just blue. And so how do you get all the colors? Well, they put filters in front of the every pixel. There's a little green filter, a little red filter, a little blue filter, and a filter that turns it white, I guess. I think that's basically how they work. I'm not sure about the white subpixel and WRGB. But anyway, there's filters. But of course, filters lose you some of the light, right? You're taking a blue backlight and you're trying to change it to red, green, and blue. You end up losing the wavelengths that are not the color you want them to, and that reduces the brightness, which is one of the problems that OLEDs have. So the reason I'm talking about all this is because quantum.OLED sounds like a sci-fi thing, and I put some links in the show notes that explain how it works. Again, quantum dots are many, many years old, but they're finally to the point where they can put them in a television, hopefully in an economic way. We'll talk about that in a second. what they do is they have the same blue backlight, because that's like the cheapest way to make it. It's not a backlight. I'm sorry I said it. Every individual pixel is a tiny blue pixel, right? Every individually controlled pixel on an OLED is the tiny blue individually controlled OLED. The quantum dot sits in front of each one of the individual pixels and changes the light to be the wavelength they want. One of them changes it to green, one of them changes to red, and they just let the blue one straight through. And the quantum dot thing does it using some physics stuff that's explained in these videos in a way that loses you almost none of the light. It like changes the wavelength of the light without like blocking it or filtering it. It just it's quantum physics. It's literally quantum physics. The bottom line is now you have individually controlled pixels where you don't lose as much of the light through the stupid red, green, and blue filter things, or red-green filters in this case. You don't need the W subpixel anymore. You don't need the big honkin' white subpixels. You can have red, green, and blue subpixels, and you get almost 100% of the light from the blue OLED that's behind it. You do get 100% in the blue case because there's not even any quantum dot in front of that, I think. I think it just comes through as blue because it's a blue, LED. And what that means is OLED televisions with way better brightness, without the white subpixel to wash out the images, so they have better color reproduction and all the same advantages of OLED. And so this is super cool. In theory, maybe also less burn-in because you don't have to drive the pixels as hard because you're not losing as much light to the filtering. And the harder you drive the pixels, the more they wear out because they have organic compounds in them and crap. We'll see. All right, so right now, the only company that makes QD-OLED panels is not LG, but Samsung.
Oh.
Samsung also makes televisions, but Samsung is not shipping a QD-OLED TV. I think it's the same kind of deal with like LG Display and LG Electronics. There's like this adversarial relationship between the people who make the panels and the people who make the TVs. So the only company, as far as I'm aware, in 2022 that's selling a QD-OLED TV is Sony is selling a QD-OLED containing a Samsung QD-OLED panel. No pricing has been announced yet, and there's some scary things about it that say it might be like $8,000, in which case I'm not getting one. But that's the situation now, and I find it really exciting. If you've never heard of QD, and you might have heard of QD quantum dot stuff for QLEDs, because quantum dot LCD televisions also exist where they use quantum dots instead of filters, but with an LCD backlight. But those have all the same problems with the backlight thing. If the backlight is across the whole thing, that's bad. And if the backlight has 2,000 regions for 4 million pixels, that's also bad, right? So quantum dots are not new, but quantum dots plus OLED is new. And I'm super excited about it. I'll probably talk more about the Sony television on Rectifs because that's where I get to complain about the stands people put on televisions. But that's the TV news for 2022. And the reason it's related to, it's a tech stuff too, but also in terms of Apple stuff, if you're looking for what is the sort of next step in, I guess, iPad, but also even like Pro Display XDR type stuff, it's either quantum.OLED, which I can imagine them maybe using on an iPad someday, or micro LED, which is where instead of having a blue LED with 3 filters in front of it, every individual subpixel is its own colored LED. Those are insanely expensive and not within the realm of commercial viability or size viability for Apple's devices yet. But we'll keep your eye on that. Meet back here in 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Wow. Are you ever really going to buy a new? I almost said new computer. I'm so used to saying that. A new television. Like, is this ever really going to happen?
I mean, I was waiting to see what they were going to say at CES because the rumors ahead of time thought somebody was going to ship a QD OLED TV, and we just assumed it would be Samsung because they're making the panels. But now it's Sony, and that makes me want it more because I hate Samsung. Like, their TVs are more scummy. But before CES, I was like, I should buy a Sony A90J when they get cheap. Like, as soon as the new TVs come out, like, I should buy the last of someone's inventory of Sony A90J, which is like one of the best OLED televisions from last year. In particular, I like it because they have a heatsink in it, and the heatsink, in theory, helps with image retention. It just seems like a good idea for me. All of the new top-end OLED TVs have at least 1 or 2 models with heatsinks in them, so I feel like Sony was ahead of the game by introducing one last year. But I figured, I know QD-OLED's coming out. If QD-OLEDs are $8,000 or something, then maybe I'll get an A90J for, under $2,000. But I haven't seen the pricing for the Sony yet, so we'll see.
We are sponsored this week by Squarespace. Start building your website today at squarespace.com/ATP. Enter offer code ATP at checkout to get 10% off. Make your next move with Squarespace. Now, it's the new year. Maybe you have a new project in mind. Everything needs a website to start with. And Squarespace makes it super easy to make a website. No matter what your skill level is, there is no coding required at Squarespace. So whether you're a nerd or whether you're a regular person or whether you're setting something up for a regular person, but yet you are a nerd because you're listening to our show, all of those things that you find on Squarespace, no matter what your skill level or the person who is going to be operating the site's skill level is, they can do it on Squarespace. And it's intuitive, it's easy to use, everything is visual, drag and drop, live previewing and everything, and your site always looks professionally designed because their templates start from an amazing starting point, and then you can customize it however you want to fit your branding or your theme or your preferences or whatever. So Squarespace sites don't all look the same, but they all look great, and they look great on every device every time. You can even get a free domain if you sign up for a year. So see for yourself by starting a free trial site at Squarespace, and you can see everything you can do without giving them a credit card, without having to worry about canceling on time or anything. All those worries are gone. You don't have to worry about things like support. You don't have to worry about server maintenance, software upgrades, uptime, patches. All that stuff is out of your hands with Squarespace. Go start a trial site today and build the site you want to build and see how great it is. Whether it's a simple site to a complex site, you can build it on Squarespace really easily, and it's fantastic. When you're ready to sign up, go back there, squarespace.com/ATP, and use offer code ATP at checkout to get 10% off. Once again, squarespace.com/ATP, offer code ATP at checkout for 10% off your first purchase. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring our show. Make your next move with Squarespace.
So there was a very interesting article that came out, or that I was made aware of sometime last week, and it was on whathifi.com, which is a pretty funny name for a online magazine. And it's an interview with Gary Geeves, I hope I pronounced that right, who is the vice president of acoustics at Apple. And, some of this is exactly what you would expect from this sort of thing, but some of it was really, really good. And there's a few quotes that I think John and I have pulled from the article that I'd like to read you. Gary says, so from the analytic to, let me give you some more context. So this is about, creating the new AirPods 3 and to some degree the other AirPods as well. And Gary is very much in charge, maybe not in charge of, but very integral to creating these, particularly with regard to doing the mathematics and science behind acoustics, right? Is that a fair summary?
Sure.
So a couple of quotes from the article. So from the analytic tuning, we work closely with an expert team of critical listeners and tuners. Many of these are folks from the pro audio industry, and really what they try to do is intentionally refine the sound signature for each product. AirPods in this case, so that it's accurate, but it's also exciting and moving. So they're, trying to work with people who are actually doing this sort of thing for a living and trying to make it sound good, which is pretty excellent. Moving along, this is further down in the article. When watching a movie on Apple TV, I just thought this was fascinating. Using spatial audio, the virtual speakers are placed further away from you than when you're watching on an iPhone. So let me kind of repeat that and change how it's phrased. So if you're doing that spatial audio thing, which is like the fake surround sound, like the computational surround sound, if you're doing that with an iPhone, the virtual center, if you will, of all of that audio is, and I'm making the numbers up, but it's like, a foot in front of your face. Whereas if you do that with an Apple TV, they place the virtual center of all of that audio like 6 feet in front of your face. So it seems to be commensurate with the screen you're watching, which is obvious once you hear that, but I don't know. I just think that's really cool. And then final quote from this. Obviously, the wireless... Oh, this was kind of the money quote of the whole article. Obviously, the wireless technology is critical for content delivery, but also for things like the amount of latency you get when you move your head. If that's too long between you moving your head and the sound changing or remaining static, it will make you feel quite ill. So we have to concentrate very hard on squeezing the most that we can out of Bluetooth technology. There's a number of tricks we can play to maximize or get around some of the limits of Bluetooth. But it's fair to say that we would like more bandwidth in... I'll stop right there. We would like more bandwidth. And then apparently he smiled. So everyone is taking this, and I think reasonably so, to mean, hey, guess what? Apple's going to do some custom thing instead of Bluetooth, or some like custom overlay perhaps of Bluetooth, in order to get more bandwidth and less latency from their wireless headphones. And
I think the more reasonable interpretation is when someone says that, and we've seen a lot of Apple people on stage saying this type of thing, is they they talk about a technical limitation in the abstract, and then what they'd like to tell you is, and future products will fix that in some way. But then they stop themselves and say, well, of course, they're not going to tell you about future products. But the only thing they're saying is here, we would like more bandwidth, and our future products will have more bandwidth. But there's lots of ways future products can have more bandwidth. Maybe it's a new Bluetooth standard. Maybe they use wires for everything. Probably not likely. Maybe it's a totally custom thing. And so that's the mystery of like, all this is an Apple person saying is, yes, Bluetooth is bandwidth constrained. We don't like it. And it's a thing we're going to fix. So that's sort of like confirmed. Apple says future audio products will have more bandwidth, which is like, duh, they have all this lossless audio that they can't play over their headphones. That's not a situation that's going to stay for a very long time.
Yeah, so wait. So let's pause right there. This is what I was about to get to, and it's an important point. So Apple's been working really hard to get their entire catalog, if I'm not mistaken, I might have the particulars wrong, it doesn't really matter, to get a lot of their stuff to be lossless. So typically when you compress audio, we've talked about this on ATP a bajillion times, but when you compress audio, you arguably lose data that arguably nobody can hear anyway. But one way or another approach you can take is to compress it in such a way that you are not losing any data, hence lossless.
Basically zip for audio.
Yeah, actually, it's a good way of looking at it. You're exactly right.
It works slightly differently, although not that much differently, and it's the same similar effect.
Yeah. So a lot of people are really into lossless audio. I will let you decide, listener, if it's snake oil or not. But one way or another, I kind of think it is too. But that's neither here nor there. One way or another, in order to send lossless audio to say a set of AirPods, you need a lot of bandwidth in order to do that, or at least compared to the Bluetooth standards of today. And so if Apple wants to be able to say, oh, our fancy schmancy new AirPods 2 support lossless audio, which we conveniently have in our entire Apple Music library, then hey, guess what? They're going to need to have a different method of communicating between your phone or computer or what have you and the AirPods. And so that's kind of what everyone's putting together. And this is what John was just starting to say, is that, hey, Apple's saying they want more bandwidth. They probably want it because of this big push for lossless audio. Snake oil be damned. And so this is all starting to fall into place.
Yeah. So the next step in the story is a good, I talked about MaxTech, his YouTube channel that tries to sort of summarize and gather up all of the rumors, kind of the way we do on this podcast. MaxTech had a good video collecting this info. And here is the rumor that I think makes a lot of sense. And I'll be now that I've sort of read all about it and everything, I'll be kind of disappointed that this ends up not being true. Again, all the Apple person said was more bandwidth would be good. And ... Apple was probably going to do a thing with more bandwidth. One way that Apple can get more bandwidth and other stuff that is useful to Apple in many different ways is to use ultra wideband, which is something you should have heard of if you listen to this program or if you watch Apple keynotes, because Apple has been shipping the U1 chip in many of its devices, and that is an ultra wideband chip. Right now, Apple uses it to help you find your AirTags and unlock your car. And what was the thing they showed? They had
AirDrop. It lets you do AirDrop slightly cooler.
Yeah.
It's a very minor difference.
But for as it's relevant to audio, here are some stats about it. So first, bandwidth. So we were just talking about that. Gary Geeves says they want more of. Ultra wideband apparently goes up to 675 megabits. That's as compared to 2.1 megabits for Bluetooth 5.0. And 9.2 megabits for Apple's high-res lossless audio. So plenty of headroom there. Like Apple's audio is 9.2 megabits, and that's not that can't fit in the 2.1 megabits of Bluetooth, but 675, you're fine, right? Power consumption, another thing that's important to Apple. Apparently, ultra wideband uses 10 times less power than BTLE, Bluetooth Low Energy. So that's great. It's looking really good. Range, this is the one that seems iffy. I put citation needed in the docs, but actually there is a citation in the video. Lots of different things you can find about the range of ultra wideband. It varies widely, but this video cites a paper that says in their testing of file transfer using ultra wideband, they were getting 25 meters versus 10 meters for Bluetooth. In practice, as I walk around my house, I have extensively tested the range of Bluetooth as I leave my phone in the kitchen and go up to the attic while listening to a podcast. I know how to move quickly throughout the house to not run out the audio buffer and to get back into range. But Bluetooth goes much farther than you think it does. And so if ultra wideband is anything close to twice the range, I think it's great. The next one is latency. You might think this doesn't matter too much when you're playing a song or something, but latency is super important to things like AR. That's what Gary was talking about in this thing here of like turning your head and the audio not lagging behind it or whatever. The latency of Bluetooth is not great. In this article that we'll put a link to in the show notes, they measured it to be 20 to 30 milliseconds at best. An ultra wideband that this company called Spark has demonstrated a sub 0.2 millisecond latency. So from 30 milliseconds to 0.2 milliseconds, possibly down to 0.1 if they really push it. So way lower latency.
And that, by the way, that would allow it to be probably used as a live monitoring headphone, which current Bluetooth headphones just cannot do because of, among other problems, latency. But if you wanted to, say, have that be your live monitoring headphone while you're podcasting or playing music or recording video or something, right now we all have to use wired headphones to do that. That kind of latency, if it can be that low, end to end, that would allow live monitoring, and that would be great.
I was thinking of that when I was just thinking, I heard a discussion between some people about this, but I realized I didn't hear a discussion. It was actually a Twitter conversation that shows how I sort of like reify things in my brain when I'm reading Twitter. I actually hear the voices of the people talking, especially if I know them. And it was someone responding to someone else that I know that like, oh, Apple keeps removing these headphone ports and it's terrible because if you're doing live audio monitoring, you need that zero latency connection. I was like, A, nothing is zero latency. And B, you don't need it to be zero. It just needs to be low enough that, you don't notice. This person was talking about editing video, all the things you just talked about, real-time applications where it's annoying if there's even a few milliseconds of lag, right?
Yeah, if it can be like the low single digits of milliseconds at the most, then that really enables a lot of those applications.
Right, and if it can be 0.2 milliseconds,
then that's great.
Going to be as good. Here's the like in this quote here from this article, the 0.2 milliseconds. This company says this is far beyond what Bluetooth can do, and it's even faster than what many commercially available USB wired mice can deliver. So that sometimes USB wired peripherals can't even get this low latency. So this would solve the latency problem for devices without headphone jacks.
Well, at the protocol level. I mean, you would still have like whatever the software stack is that's feeding it and everything. So there would be other complexities to overcome, certainly, but that would go a long way for sure.
Yeah. And as the article interview with the Apple person said, very relevant to VR, AR goggles and whipping your head around and having spatial audio and having the audio correctly and very quickly react to how you're moving your head. Like this is very relevant, as I said, very relevant to Apple's interests. Like all the specs that we read so far. And finally, there's Spectrum.
You know where it's also relevant? Wireless headphones for games. Mm-hmm. And probably, I would assume, game controllers, like wireless game console controllers. I would imagine that would also be very valuable.
Yep, although most of them don't use spatial stuff. And the lag they do, because I use wireless audio headphones when I'm doing Destiny things, and the lag, it's not like editing audio in real time where you're kind of annoyed by the lag, and it doesn't do head tracking, so there's no sort of spatial queasiness, and the lag that is there is not as big an effect if you're not doing that. But the VR headset stuff is more relevant. And by the way, Sony did announce a new VR thing for PS5, but they did it as a press release with no pictures. It was great. They just described it. They're like, we have a VR headset and it has this many pixels per eye and this many frames per second and this much latency and these features. And no, we can't tell you anything more about it or show any pictures. But
she goes to a different school.
Yeah, exactly. Canadian girlfriend VR helmet. Yeah.
God, that took me a second. Well done.
So Spectrum, we'll put a little link in the show notes that has this graph from this Android Authority article showing the Spectrum. I don't know if the scale on the bottom is, if the scale is to scale, but as the name, would make you suspect, ultra wideband uses a very wide band of spectrum. They use like 500 megahertz wide channels. And part of the thing that makes ultra wideband work is that it's very, very wide, like lots of different frequencies. I think this was made possible by freeing up a bunch of frequencies that maybe were used for analog applications in the past. So it's very, very wide band, and it's out of the way of other standards. Like it's not in the same range as Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, which are both they can both be in the 2.4 gigahertz range. So Bluetooth can mess with Wi-Fi if you're not using 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi and everything. But ultra wideband is super wide, so it can avoid interference and other things, and it doesn't interfere with any of our existing standards. And it's very, very low power. In fact, according to this article, below the noise floor of most of the other standards. So it's like invisible to them because it's so low power. They ignore signals that are that low. So I read all this and I'm like, I guess I knew the U1 chip was in there. I knew about ultra wideband. I knew what it was capable of. Like a lot of the things that the applications were saying, like of how you can use it to find your AirTags or point it at your phone to AirDrop with people and stuff. Use the improved ability to get time of flight information for multiple devices, so you can tell how far away it is and which direction it's pointing and stuff. It knows when you get close to your car, but I never thought of it as like, can we just use this as a replacement for Bluetooth? And believe me, we need a replacement for Bluetooth. Bluetooth sucks. It's gotten so much better over the years, but it really is the main thing that annoys me about wireless audio. I like the fact that every device has Bluetooth. I like the fact that my car has it, my phone has it, my iPad has it. I don't like how long it takes for things to connect and disconnect. And Apple's tried to do the best they could to make that better with its whatever H1 chip, and it is better. And I actually do like the automatic switching, even though Marco doesn't. And I do like.
Oh, actually, can we? Let me interrupt you real quick. I have been I don't think I've said it, but I've been an automatic switching apologist for a long time. And after the 95th time that I'm actively listening to something on my phone, but one of the kids is using the aforementioned iPad to play like a kid-friendly, like educational game. And I think it's because I hadn't touched my phone in a while and the iPad is actively being used. Suddenly I'm like out in front of the house and my stupid AirPods Pro, which I still love, are suddenly jumping over to the iPad, even though I'm actively listening to a friggin' podcast. I finally decided that at least for the iPad, I am turning off auto switching, because what is nice is that maybe I misunderstood it, but I think it's by device. I think.
Yes, it's in order to disable auto switching for the AirPods, you have to turn it off on every device that has ever connected to them.
Which actually in my use case is kind of nice, because I want it on my computer and I want it on my my iPhone, but I don't want it on the iPad that the kids occasionally steal to play, kiddo educational games. So I have to mea culpa a little bit and eat a little bit of crow and say I am at least partially embracing the no auto switching lifestyle, because it was driving me bananas.
Also,
but John,
is there a way for me to disable the prompt on the Apple TV where
seriously,
it tells you the iPhones, AirPods are nearby?
Yes.
When I walk in from a dog walk and Adam and Tiff are watching Adventure Time like 6 feet away on the TV in front of the front door, and it pops up a thing, and I'm like, okay, now I'm like, all right, don't click my headphones right now, because it'll take the audio from the TV. I please. If anybody knows how to turn that off in a quick way, please let me know.
Maybe you could just turn off Bluetooth on your Apple TV somewhere.
Can you? The remote control is Bluetooth.
I was going to say.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know. Anyway, yeah, this is the thing. Like that kind of feature probably works great if you are single and live alone. If you're the only person who's ever going to use the devices that are physically in your place, that probably works fantastically. But I think it breaks down a lot once there's multiple people around. Then it's like, okay, well, now somebody could be watching the Apple TV and you could be walking in with your dog listening to a podcast and not be able to like click the button in your headphones now, because it'll take the audio from the TV. And by the way, they have to then look at this giant overlay saying, hey, AirPods Pro nearby, you want to connect? Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because I am terrible in that I use the little case cover of the AirPods as like a fidget spinner, which I know I shouldn't do.
Oh, God. So it's like constantly
popping up.
But that's the thing, is that it's on the TV like constantly, which is my fault. But Aaron, literally today, Aaron said to me, because we were standing in the kitchen and you can see the TV from the kitchen, and I was looking at Aaron, but Aaron, I guess, happened to be facing the TV, and I'm doing the
flip, 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 flip.
I'm just doing that over and over again.
She's like, leave it.
Seriously, it was like she was talking to Penny.
We should get you a dedicated case just for fidgeting and just remove the battery from it.
You're right, but she seriously, it was basically like she was talking to Penny, and she's like, "Can you stop playing with your AirPods, please?" I was like, "What? Oh, right, sorry."
Before we get back to ultra wideband, I will say that I still enjoy the auto switching. Like when I'm sitting in my bed at night watching a TV show on my iPad and someone texts me something on my phone, I pick up my phone and I'm still watching the TV show with my AirPods in. I'm watching it on the iPad. I pick up my phone. My phone brings down the overlay that says like, oh, John's AirPods. But the audio is still coming out of the iPad. And then I look at the message and it's like, oh, someone sent me a funny TikTok. So I tap on the funny TikTok. It starts playing immediately through my headphones. And then I put down my phone and the audio goes right back to my iPad. It's like magic. It works exactly like Apple says. And if I had to manually switch, I would never do that. But I do want to see the TikTok, but I don't want to annoy my wife with TikTok audio. I love the auto switching. Can't live without it. Can live without everything that has to do with Bluetooth, because it really is not my friend, and it takes way too long.
By the way-
That's setting aside all of the other stuff.
Today I learned that I can send you funny TikToks.
Yeah. So, this ultra wideband stuff, I really hope these rumors are true, because I think, I couldn't look this up, but according to this video, every iPhone since the iPhone 11 has had the U1, even like the cheap SE stuff. I'm not sure about that. Certainly all the flagship phones have. But the point is, these U1 chips are out there. And we talked for years, like, why are all these U1 chips in these Apple devices? What are they doing there? It's like, oh, I guess they can use, again, when it was just AirDrop, it was stupid. And every time they add a feature to it, it's like, oh, maybe that's where they added the U1. But imagine if ultra wideband becomes the wireless audio connection standard for all AirPods, starting with the new AirPod Pro 2 and continuing for like revisions of all of their products after that, including their AR/VR headset, including all future AirPods. Maybe they'll also support Bluetooth because they have to work in cars and stuff like that. But please bring on the ultra wideband revolution. If this works as advertised with these type of specs, it seems so much better than Bluetooth. And again, ultra wideband is not something Apple invented. It's an open standard, just like Bluetooth. Anybody can implement it, I think. If Apple does a good job with this, and if this standard is better than Bluetooth in all the ways that we know with like modern eyes and the use cases people are going to use it for, I want this yesterday. And we can kind of get it yesterday, because if they introduce, unfortunately they'd be AirPod Pros too, and I don't like the Pros because they go on my ear canals, but if they introduce AirPods with ultra wideband, it's not like you have to buy all new devices to use them. All the way back to the iPhone 11, they'll work. They won't work in your car, and which means I hope they also support Bluetooth. But wow, I would love, and I don't care about the high bandwidth for the lossless. I don't care about any of that. I just want the range, the power, and hopefully faster, more reliable connect-disconnect. So as far as I'm concerned, bring on this rumor.
Yeah, like they've had those U1 chips in the phones for a few years now, and when they first came out, like it's always been the story of everyone's kind of wondering, like, well, they have to have some kind of other plan for these. Like they've been putting them in for so long, and they've done suspiciously little with them in public. And so the idea has always been like, I bet they're planning on using these in a clever way in the future. And I think the fun thing where the AirTags show you like how to zoom in on the AirTag when you're getting near your object, that is probably not the only plan they had for that. So that I think this is a very, very plausible theory that this could be the direction they go with the AirPods. And I hope it's true, just like you. I really want this to be true, because Bluetooth is awful for so many reasons. It has surfaced well for many years, but its time has passed, and this would be great if this works nearly as well as they say it will.
Real-time follow-up from Alex Sabensky in the Apple TV. Settings, remotes and devices, Bluetooth, suggest nearby AirPods off. And I will put that in the show notes.
All right, I'm doing that yesterday. Right after this podcast, before I go to bed. I'm setting that on both the Apple TVs.
The other good thing about ultra wideband is, because it's not a proprietary thing, in theory, it could also be in all of our cars in the future too. It's not like, oh, Apple's doing its own thing. Like, this is why it's better than Apple coming up with its own protocol and its own everything, right? It's using a newer, better industry standard that suits this purpose. And I think this ultra wideband would also be better for all the same reasons in all of our cars. Obviously, car technology takes a long time to catch up, so I'm not holding my breath for that. But
in the meantime, we'll be able to buy some $12 thing off Amazon that plugs into the cigarette lighter and offers an ultra wideband receiver.
That's the big question. If this rumor is true, does Apple continue to support Bluetooth everywhere? I think they probably, obviously, like, phones would still have Bluetooth to work in cars. That's the main use case. But like, maybe the AirPods no longer support Bluetooth, so you can't use them as generic Bluetooth headphones anymore. Or maybe the first version has both the ultra wideband and Bluetooth, but then eventually they drop the Bluetooth in the headphones only, because it's not like people are using their AirPods to connect to their car, I don't think, right? It's like more of a...
Well, but like, do Macs have ultra wideband chips in them? Like, do the M1 Macs have that
Macs
chip?
don't have Face ID.
That's true.
Just because something is cool and
Right.
works in lots of Apple products doesn't mean Macs have to have it. I think that's stupid, and I think Macs should have the U1 chip. I don't know if they do. Like, maybe the M1s do. I don't know.
I don't remember hearing about it, so I would assume they probably don't. But that could be interesting.
Go to System Profiler and look like the device tree on your Mac and see if there's anything that looks like a U1 chip
would it show up here
somewhere? I don't know. We'll find out by next week. Someone who works at Apple, tell us whether the Macs have U1 chips.
All right. do we have time for a little bit of Ask ATP?
Is there any, maybe we can pick and choose questions. Is there anyone, what are the questions here? Any one of these three that you like?
I have one I would like to ask because I want to know the answer to this. I feel like I've talked to you about this before, actually. Nathaniel Gorey writes, how much sleep do you each get on a night on average? In particular, does John sleep at all? Preach. He seems to have an endless list of commitments between a jobby job, regular podcasts, app dev, Destiny, media consumption, oh yeah, and 2 kids. Yes, I would also like to know, John, when do you sleep? And I know we've talked about this in the past, I think privately mostly, but I don't understand how you do as much as you do.
Yeah, so the answer is, I don't know how much sleep I got on average, so the answer is not as much as I should. Like, that's that's the unfortunate answer. I do have a lot of commitments. Over the years, I have adjusted things in my life to fit the amount of time and energy that I have. That has varied. When my children were very young, like infants and toddlers, obviously it was much worse. But on the other hand, I think I had fewer podcasts then, right? I didn't have as many, like, it's a balance, right? I have the number of podcasts I have and what my recording schedule looks like and the job that I have and how much time I spend on all the other stuff. Like, it just barely fits. Mostly kind of doesn't fit because I'm not getting enough sleep. And the way that works is, how do I get to do any fun stuff? Like, if I have a day where I just, from the moment I wake up, I'm always doing something, right? And then the day ends and I felt like I've worked like the entire day because it's like, doing kid stuff in the morning, getting kids off to school, and then a regular 9 to 5-ish job, plus or minus working from home COVID weirdness, ferrying kids around, doing other stuff, and then getting dinner, and then cleaning up after dinner, and then doing a podcast. And by that point, like, now my day is over. Now I get to have the me time, right? And how do you end up having me time? Where do you get to play Destiny? You get to watch some TV shows. Sometimes to get more quote unquote me time, the way I do that is by cutting into sleep, because it's the one part of the day that has some flexibility. I can't really, work fewer hours at my jobby job. I can't really record fewer hours of podcasts because it's kind of regular schedule and a commitment. I can't avoid driving kids around or doing, all that stuff or whatever. So the only thing that is a flex block kind of is sleep. And that's why I don't get enough sleep, because I'll want to watch, not just one episode of a show, but I'm behind 2 episodes, or I'm behind in 1 episode in 3 of my shows, or I want to do a thing in Destiny that takes several hours to complete or whatever. And yeah, I end up eating into sleep. Weekends do still exist though, and I try not to have any podcasts on weekends if I can at all help it, so I can play more Destiny on weekends if I'm not doing other things, right? I would like to get 8 hours of sleep. I do not. Usually, if you want to know like what my current situation with the current set of responsibilities and stuff like that, in general, I'm in bed by midnight and the alarm goes off at 6:30.
Oy.
That's not enough sleep. I do not recommend this approach. Do not do this.
That's terrible.
Yeah, that really is. So Aaron's alarm goes off, I think like 6:15-ish, and then usually I'll loiter in bed for just a few more minutes before I get out of bed. And I'm out of bed no later than 6:30 on a weekday. And I am usually climbing in bed around 10, give or take a little bit. And I'm usually not falling asleep until around 11. So I'm getting easily an hour more sleep than you are, John. And I feel like I still accomplish quite a bit less. Marco, what's your schedule?
I'm really boring. I go to bed most nights around 10:30 and wake up most mornings around 6:30. So I get the 8 hours you're supposed to get most nights, or something close to it. Maybe 1 hour less if I stay up too late watching TV or something. But it's pretty boring. That's I didn't always get this much or little, depending on how you look at it, sleep. But that's kind of where I am now. That's why when I briefly did sleep tracking with the Apple Watch this past fall. And I stopped doing it after about a week or two, because I'm like, well, this isn't really actionable information that this is telling me. Like, I don't, right now, in this point in my life, I seem to have fairly normal functional sleep. And that's it.
If you want to feel like an underachiever with your sleep, you should get, I recently got a new tracker dog collar thing that I'm trying for my dog.
Oh,
and
for
it also does.
I was going to say for you.
Yeah. And it also does sleep tracking.
For your dog?
Yes. And I'm fairly shocked by the numbers in the dog sleep tracking.
No, dogs sleep a lot. They're kind of supposed to. Like, they're made for that. Like, they're built that way, that they do get a lot of sleep normally in a healthy way.
So what's your guess? I mean, I still don't have I think I only have maybe like a couple weeks worth of data here, but what's your guess for sleep numbers for my dog?
Hours per day? Oh, geez. I would say, I mean, I don't know. Dogs seem to be like in a very light sleep a lot. They're almost like screensavers. Like if you don't play with them for a few minutes, they go into power save mode and just fall asleep. Like,
Well, keep in mind, my dog is young. She's only 4 years old, and she goes to a doggy play date most days during the week where she sees other dogs and runs around in the backyard and is just generally a crazed beast.
I'm going to say something like 16 hours a day.
Yeah, I was going to say somewhere between 12 and like 18. So yeah, I'll go 50. Are we doing Price is Right rules? How are we doing?
Sure, Price is Right rules.
Price is Right rules, $1. No, I would say 15 hours.
What did Marco say? 16?
16, yeah.
Actual answer, 18 hours per day.
Ah, damn.
But here's the breakdown. 8.9 hours per night, because my dog is up by like 6:30 a.m. every single day, which is one of the reasons the household has to get, or at least someone in the household, although it's usually my wife, she usually does this for me, has to take the dog out at 6:30 a.m., although the whole house starts at that time of day on the weekdays anyway, just to get everyone up and out. But then during the day, 9.3 hours average nap time. And that's with like going to a doggy play date and going on multiple walks and doing all that stuff and getting way more steps than us during the day because it does step tracking too. As the notifications frequently say, my dog is crushing it. Crushing it by sleeping 18 hours a day and getting like 37,000 steps.
I fully understand this is not an endorsement. You just got the device, but which tracker are you using now?
Yeah, so this is actually a good tech story. Like the reason I have any kind of tracker collar thing is because my dog is a flight risk.
Same. Is there any way to fix this? Because it's driving me
There
batty.
is in theory, but like you read a lot of stuff about it, and here's the thing. Dogs with very strong prey drive are very difficult to train to come back to you because the whole training process relies on you having something that the dog finds motivating. So you can use like pieces of steak or hot dogs or whatever you think, like a whole live chicken, like whatever you think your dog is going to be into, right? As soon as you get something that the dog finds desirable, you can train a dog to do anything, right? The problem comes when the most desirable thing in the entire world, as far as the dog is concerned,
away.
is the squirrel, the bird, the whatever, and nothing you ever have, no piece of food, meat, treat, nothing you ever have will ever compete with what's out there. I feel like it's impossible to train a dog to do that. Now, that's not always true because maybe that is interesting now, but maybe when the dog was a puppy, it was more interested in whatever you could find, and I just did a bad job of training, recall, or whatever, but my dog has a very, very strong prey drive. So birds, squirrels, rabbits, those are the most interesting things in the world. And so when we take the dog to the dog park, which is unfenced because of annoying people who live near me who consistently block the ability for us to put a fence around our dog park, because they think it would be ugly or something, because their dogs aren't flight risks or because they just don't care. Anyway, I don't like those people. We take our dog to the dog park and she runs around and plays with the other dogs, and it's like she's on a timer because eventually when she gets bored of the other dogs that are there, she will see a bird a mile away and say, you know what, I'm going there now, and she's off like a shot. So we need, too many times that happened, we said we need to get a GPS on this dog. So we want to have a GPS, so when the dog runs off, we can pull out our phones and literally be able to track this dog anywhere to find the dog and bring it back home, right? So we had this, the whistle thing for the longest time, but my dog is small. It's like a 40-pound dog. And the whistle GPS is a big cube. Like it's literally like a rectangular solid. And I feel bad putting this big rectangular solid on the collar. It's not very heavy. But I feel bad when the dog's laying down and like the little cube is in the way. I'm always rotating it out of the way. So it's, just, I wanted something that was slimmer. So, me and Marco are Instagram ad victims. Instagram advertising. Half of my ads on Instagram are now dog stuff because they got my number on that. And there was this new company. I think I saw them like a couple of years ago. Maybe they were even a Kickstarter that was like, now a new GPS dog collar. I'm like, wow, that looks way slimmer than the big brick that I have now. But I just forgot about it because I figured the company would go out of business and never make a product. But somehow they did make a product, and it's a real shipping thing. And I started getting Instagram ads for it, and I ordered it, and it is slimmer. There are other problems with it that I'm currently working on because it's this weird detachable thing, and it's like integrated with the collar. But I'd rather not have it integrated with the collar. I'd rather just have it attached to the collar and just have a conventional collar. So I'm working out the collar details, still iterating on this process. But the point is, I got it. It is slimmer. The app is a little bit fancier than the old one. It does sleeper tracking. The old one didn't. On the other hand, the whistle did lick tracking. How much is your dog? It did
my.
licking and scratching. How much is your dog licking and how much is your dog scratching? And is that abnormal or not to see, anyway.
That's interesting. Yeah. Cause those are common problems for dogs.
I feel like I would notice them in person. Like I don't need the app to tell me that, but it's interesting that it do that. Really only we're just using it for the GPS feature. But the main thing I wanted to check is like how good is how long does the battery last and how good is the GPS? Like when the dog is lost, does it update once every 5 minutes? Because that kind of sucks. You'll always be, behind where the dog was. You'll get to where the dog was 5 minutes ago, but now it's not there anymore, right? So this seems to work pretty well. It updates every 60 seconds. The battery is pretty darn good. The original Whistle battery was terrible. The new Whistle battery is so good that I forget to charge it because it's like you can last like a month. The new one says it lasts from 1 to 3 months. I think 1 month is probably what it's going to end up lasting. Let me find the.
So what's the name of it?
Company.
You never actually told
me. It is FI. I don't know if it's Phi or Phi. The URL is tryfi.com. Try-Fi. Because I guess they couldn't get fi.com. So you can see it's way slimmer than a giant rectangular thing, but on a small dog, the default collars are 1 inch wide, which is a little bit too wide for me. And I don't like the tracker to be an integral part of the collar, just because I don't trust that the little hinge things will hold. And if the tracking collar breaks off of your dog, right, then that you've defeated the purpose because now your dog is loose and doesn't have the tracker on it. So I'm trying to look into a thinner collar that's not as wide and that also the collar is just a complete collar and then the tracker goes on the outside of it. The nice thing about this company is I bought this collar because I saw it advertised and I got it and hooked it up and used it and, it's going well and everything. And then like 2 days after I got the collar and started to use it, I started seeing Instagram ads for $100 off the collar.
What? Why don't you tell me about these things?
I just ordered it, and now Instagram just constantly was showing it to me. It was like the ad I kept seeing. It was like it's rubbing it in my face. $100 off, So I was like making jokes to my wife. I'm like, I should email these people and just say, I know you shouldn't honor this. Like I just thought of Merlin and like the people who are at like the Walgreens with an expired coupon saying, I know this coupon is expired. Can you honor it anyway? It's like, that's the point of the expiration date. No, you can't honor it anyway. It's expired. It's like, yeah, but I'm me. Can't I get the discount? Right. I know you ordered this before we had this sale, but I figured it's worth a try. I'll try to be nice about it. And basically I just sent them screenshots of the Instagram ads. And I said, I'm seeing these ads everywhere. I know I ordered this collar like a few days ago and the sale wasn't on then, but is there any way you can give me the discount anyway? And they immediately replied and said, oh yeah, sure. You're still within the return window, which is essentially them saying, we know that you could just return this and buy it again, but please don't do that. We'll save you the effort. And so they just gave me the discount like retroactively, which I thought was great. So this ended up being like a $50 purchase for a brand new GPS dog collar. Obviously you have to pay a yearly subscription for the GPS thing. This one does Wi-Fi, GPS, and LTE. So it's like in every possible band. And the way it does the power savings is you have to make sure it's on Wi-Fi when it's in your house because that's way lower power and it just checks in periodically. And then when it leaves your house, then it goes on cellular and that takes way more power. But anyway, so far so good with the Phi thing. Still working on the collar. It is actually, it's hard to find a collar that fits well on a small dog. And like I said, I'm still trying to work through the issue of like, I don't want this to be a structural element of the collar. Like,
or the dog.
Yeah. Like when the transmission and engine are structural elements of fancy sports cars, I don't want that for my car. I just want a plain old collar where the collar is the collar, and this is thin enough that it will go on the outside of it. So that's what I'm working on now. I ordered there's a whole sort of sub ecosystem of Phi compatible collars. Like third parties make collars that work with this so that can like sort of latch onto it. And there's a whole range of them. And a lot of them seem like Etsy type sellers. So I ordered one and it's completely customizable. What color, what size, what color do you want the things? What kind of buckle clasp, what thickness, right? Do you want your dog's name engraved on it or whatever? But then it's like 2 to 3 weeks for them to, I assume, hand make this collar and send it to me. So I ordered one of those a few days ago in a few weeks when it arrives. So hopefully it'll be better than the default collar it comes with.
So how much is the annual service? Because I'm looking at this $150 collar, Instagram ad notwithstanding, but I don't see anywhere on this website, maybe I'm a moron, that it talks about how much the service is.
Yeah, I don't think they advertise too much because obviously that's where they get you, as they say, right? The service is the whole thing because you pay for it once, but you pay the service every single year. I think they give you 30 days for free. So it's like, don't worry about the service. You don't have to pay anything. You just buy it and you use it. And that's great for trying it out. but I believe it's $100 a year after that. I think you can get a discount if you buy 2 or 3 years in a row, but it's kind of the same. And the whistle was the same. The whistle is like you buy a yearly plan and it was like $100 a year. But for keeping track of your dog, it's money. If you have a dog that it's flight risk, it is money well spent.
I'm just laughing at how big these collars are because Hops wears a 3/8 inch wide collar, which is basically it's basically a cat collar. He's a 14, 15 pound dog. He's not a big dog.
Yeah, that's the problem with a lot of these GPS things. Like tech-wise, you can only make it so small, and the smaller you make it, the worse the battery life is. So people with very small dogs, it's difficult. Although I will say that in my research and looking at all these things, I do run across cat collars because cats are also flight risks. But I feel so bad for the cats in these pictures because cats are not large animals compared to a 40-pound dog most of the time. And so when you put a big tracker on a cat, they just must feel so terrible. Like, get this thing off me. But again, I feel for the people who are constantly losing their cats, who have cats that are escape artists. It's better to be able to keep track of your pet. Use modern technology. But I don't think Hops is a flight risk, so you're probably fine.
Yeah, he's really not.
Well, if you see another one of those $100 off coupons on Instagram, let me know.
They're there right now. I guarantee you they are there.
I don't get dog advertisements.
Find the code. I'll look at my sent mail. It's like a coupon code that you enter. I'm going to read it off on the air and sell some collars here. Let's see.
Use code ATP for $100
off.
There
is a referral code thing. I will try to put the referral code.
Do that.
Yeah, I'll try to put it in the show notes link. There is a referral code.
Also, for whatever it's worth, Casey, as John will tell you, I'm sure as well, this does get easier with age of the dog. Like puppies will run out anywhere for anything. As dogs get older, it becomes easier to keep them from doing that, or they will just naturally not want to run away as much.
Yeah, I keep waiting for that. Obviously, Daisy is not that old. She's only 4 years old, so that's not a puppy, but it's not old yet either. But she has not lessened in her fervor to destroy every small animal she can find.
Yeah, some dogs never change, but the odds are on your side that this will get easier.
I sure hope so, because it happened just a day or two ago. We had gotten a bunch of snow. Actually, it's worth briefly discussing this. So Richmond got somewhere, I would say, around 4 inches of snow starting Monday morning, and the first day of school since mid-December that the kids have is tomorrow, because 4 days of school ruined Richmond for 3 days. Anyways, Penny ran out because Declan was trying to go from the backyard within the fence area to the front yard, and apparently was not quick enough, and Penny was like, "Freedom!" And she was running, halfway down the neighborhood, and I looked at Erin and said, basically, if this happens again, I hope she finds her way home because I'm not chasing her. And I think I mean that because I'm so sick of it.
Oh, come on.
But I'm not sure. But anyway, so I feel like it would be nice to have something like this on her, because even though it only happens at most once a month, it infuriates me disproportionately to the frequency in which it happens, because I am just furious when it happens, because she just does not care. She's like, "Oh, there you are. Now it's a game. See ya."
You just got to be more careful with the opening and closing of the doors.
Tell my kids that.
Well, I know. It's a pain with small kids as well, but they can also be trained to do it, especially if they care about the dog. But you could also train your dog to recall at this point. I don't think she's past the trainability point.
I've
See
tried.
if you can find something that she likes more than freedom.
Yeah, nothing.
Good luck with
Absolutely nothing.
So I went to the app. There's like a QR code and there's a referral. So my referral code for tryfi.com, tryfi.com, my referral code is 59RMG2. I will put this in the show notes.
Great podcasting.
Use that referral code. This is not a sponsor. They're not a sponsor of this program at all. And the code for $100 off, I'm assuming it's still active, is New Year's 100, all one word, NEWYEARS 100. $100 off a $150 car. Why? Because they get $100 a year from you, and that's where the real money is made. It's not on this device.
I'm just glad that you found something good as a dog product on Instagram, because that is one area, I will buy pretty much any cool looking, jacket or something off Instagram, but dog stuff, between Instagram and Kickstarter, I've had terrible luck with any kind of dog-related product. Usually,
it's like a holistic medicine, but for dogs. Try this magic powder. Your dog will stop chewing. Oh, really? Don't try that stupid evidence-based medicine. Try these magic crystals. Don't go to your vet and ask about allergies. Just try this thing that we wave over your dog's head, and it will tell you that your dog is allergic to grass.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Squarespace, Linode, and Iodyne. And thanks to our members who support us directly. You can join at atp.fm/join. We will talk to you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
Something appeared in the show notes a while back, which is an interesting question, and I'm not sure how to answer it. And the question is as follows: should Apple stop using leather? ? I don't know. I feel like real honest to goodness leather, like the skin, the hide of an animal, probably not the wisest choice to use anymore. But aren't there, like, and Marco, I presume you would know best of any of us, aren't there some pretty good like synthetic or fake leathers at this point?
You should know about this from the automotive world.
Yeah, that's fair. It's
been a very big trend, especially recently, to not use leather in cars, even super expensive ones, obviously for all the obvious reasons, like aside from leather having to kill animals because they don't give you their skin for free, raising animals is expensive and bad for the environment and all. You know, it's like we can do better than leather, but of course you want something that feels expensive and is fancy. And in our childhood, fake leather was not a sign of fanciness, right? If you had a fake leather interior or a vinyl interior in your car, it was seen as less. But these days, in lots of very fancy cars, there's a trend towards having things that have some of the qualities of leather, but that are not leather. Often they call it vegan leather, which is a really weird way to phrase it, but that's what they do. And so lots of car interiors from lots of makers in very expensive cars have seats that are made of things and not leather. I've never been a big fan of leather seats just because they're cold in the winter.
Strong disagree.
They're cold in the winter, even when you have seat heaters, and I guess you can pre-warm them, but like I've always liked cloth seats because they grip you better, and but I understand cloths can seem cheap and can wear off if your butt wears a groove in it, and leather can be more sort of tough over time.
Well,
but it depends on the leather.
That.
Sometimes leather wears out near the bolsters and everything too, right?
Yep.
So I think we can do better. I think Apple should not use leather for all the reasons we stated, but also because we can do better. I think the experiments in car interiors and dashboards and other parts of cars that you touch have shown that there are other better options that are just plain better than leather, that feel good, but that are more durable and more grippy, and maybe also not as cold in the winter.
There's the arguments against using leather, I think are worth noting here, because in the context of like the kind of company Apple is, the kind of values and priorities they have, especially regarding environmentalism, it is kind of surprising. Like if Apple didn't sell leather goods already, like, and we're talking mostly, phone cases, but they also have those weird like leather pouches for Macs and stuff, and obviously like iPad covers, so that's mainly what we're looking at here. If Apple didn't sell those things initially, like in the present day, and they started selling them, I think that would seem weird. Like if there was no historical baggage, if they just started selling leather stuff as this company that's all about like environmentalism, and they're pretty, politically they're pretty progressive. They're like that would seem odd that they would start selling animal-based leather as a mass market item in their stores. Like that wouldn't be the kind of thing you would expect Apple to do. I think there's all sorts of there's all sorts of ways you could look at this question, and all sorts of people's opinions on the role of animal products in our supply chain, our food. One way to look at this is like using animals is very expensive in certain ways. It's very expensive to the environment. It's very expensive morally in certain ways, and people have different levels of which they care about that. But it's something that is very inefficient and has a lot of downsides. And like I personally, I eat animal foods, but I've been dramatically reducing how much of them I eat in the last year or so, because I've started caring more about that kind of thing. About like, if I can make this dish with oil instead of butter, I'll make it with oil. If it doesn't make that big of a difference, who cares? There's so many like meat alternatives on the market now that are really good, many of which I actually prefer to the meats that they are being alternatives to. Alternative eggs, alternative dairy products, like a lot of this alternative, milks and stuff. A lot of this stuff I have preferred the alternatives recently because they're just, in many ways, they're better. And I've started to realize like I really don't want to use animal stuff wastefully in ways that it's not really providing a big benefit to me, or in ways that there are good alternatives, because using alternatives is better for the environment. It is better morally. It does solve a lot of problems or reduce a lot of problems. So I think leather, you can look at that same way. You could say, well, if there's benefits to using things that are not leather, we should probably look into that. And there are. So that question's answered. Are there benefits to not using leather? Yes, absolutely. And then the question is, are there good alternatives? And yes, there are. And not necessarily in every possible way or style, but I think they're close enough. There's enough great alternatives to leather that I think Apple should stop using it. And that's not to say that everyone should stop using leather phone cases. Other companies will make them as they do now, and that's fine. But I think that it's weird that Apple makes leather products now, like with today's sensibilities, today's realities of environmentalism and climate change, and like the kind of stuff that's really important to the world. It does seem weird that Apple still does sell leather, and I think we have enough good alternatives that cover enough of the previous need for leather now that while other companies will continue to sell, and that's fine for them, I think Apple should lead the way here and stop.
And like I said, it's not just that we get things that are close enough to leather. We have things that are better in some ways than leather, worse in some, but better in some ways. And so for your particular application, you may find a thing that is superior to leather in all the ways that you care about for your use case. And even if you don't, you'll find something that is superior to leather in one way, but slightly worse in another way. Like, there are lots of good alternatives. And you have to be careful with the alternatives, because the alternative is like, oh, this is a petroleum-based product. That's not great either. Like, or it takes some huge amount of energy to make this alternative that it's worse than like the amount of fertilizer and runoff and grazing and methane put out by the cow that,
I mean, it would need it to be a lot to be worse than a cow.
But some synthetic stuff, they can end up being very expensive and energy inefficient, or use rare chemicals or terrible processes. You have to be careful. That's why a lot of the car interiors aren't just, oh, we use like vegan leather, but also they say things like, not only do we not use leather, but this entire dashboard is made from recycled materials, or the seats are made from ground up magazines, or like whatever. Like, they try to not just say it is an alternative that we didn't have to kill an animal for. They try to say, and also it took less energy to make. It is, less costly to the environment. It has less external side effects and stuff like that. So we've made a lot of advances in that area. And, and one example is fancy high-end supercars, if they're trying to be performance-oriented, haven't included leather for years because it's too slippery. Like, you want a seat that grips you. That's why like Alcantara and all those other sort of faux leather, faux suede type of synthetic materials come in, because performance-wise, the one characteristic that matters the most is how grippy it is, and leather just falls down there. So if you see a leather seat in a car, it's the more luxury-oriented one because it's not as grippy as the other ones, right? I think that's true of phone cases as well. I said about my leather case that I have on my phone that it almost seems like it's synthetic leather, and I would be perfectly happy if it was synthetic leather, because it doesn't even seem like good synthetic leather. It's just grippy enough. Like, it's, I don't know what alternative. Does it seem like it's vinyl or whatever, right? I want the performance characteristics of leather, but if you saw this leather case, it would take a lot for you to realize that it's not fake leather, because it looks so artificial. It's so uniform. It doesn't smell like leather. It just has a few of the performance characteristics of leather. So I would totally buy a first party or third party case with fake leather if it felt like this. And I believe that's definitely possible.
Yeah, and I think moreover, it's a sign like, Apple they care so much about environmentalism in so many other ways. You know, they'll change the materials they use in like their cables or their chip boards or whatever to avoid certain dangerous or toxic chemicals, and you know, like they make other decisions across their product lines for environmental reasons. Even when it's not, you know, popular or economical super well, like they still care a lot about environmental concerns, and they will make changes for those reasons.
Even when they're worse, by the way.
Yeah.
Even when the wires, like the plastic, whatever they were using for the plastic and like headphone cables and power cables, for many years before Apple figured out how to make something that was close to as good, they were just plain worse.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The cables were more brittle. They weren't as nice as they used to be. They didn't feel as expensive. They didn't hold up as well. But Apple made the change anyway, just to try to prevent whatever environmental harm was coming from the old one. And eventually, Apple got better enough at the more sustainable plastic that it's not as, you know, people have forgotten about the old ones. It's kind of like all the things you hear about, like, when I was a kid, product X was made with Y, and that's why it was better. I'm trying to think of a good example. Maybe it's like McDonald's fries made with lard. I think that maybe I'm the only one.
Beef tallow.
Yeah. Maybe I'm the only one old enough to remember those. And then they changed to like vegetable oil, whatever, and it was way worse. And it took McDonald's many years to try to get them back to an acceptable level. And people will still say, yeah, but they're not like they were when I was a kid. But, you know, eventually those people die, and then people grow up just having McDonald's fries the way they are. And we all move on, right? And on the meat front, the exciting / weird / gross thing to look out for potentially in our lifetimes is people are always trying to grow artificial meat. You don't have to kill any animals, and it could be like cellularly exactly the same thing as beef. We're not quite there yet. It's super expensive to do, and it doesn't quite taste and isn't quite formed the same way as real beef, but you feel like you can see a path to get there, because the fact that we can do it now in a not quite very good way at huge expense, that's how technology starts. So we just don't know how long will it take to perfect this, but if you could get it to be done economically, it would literally be beef. Like, it would be like, put it under a microscope. It is exactly the same thing as beef. You just grew it in a petri dish. You didn't have to kill an animal for it. And then you can grow it and, you know, breed out whatever harmful parts there are. Not breed, because you don't have any animals, but like eliminate the harmful parts and make essentially synthetic meat that is also real meat, but is also synthetic, but is healthier than real meat. And then you can have a whole subculture of people who celebrate killing animals because, of course, they only have beef tallow McDonald's fries, and they only kill cows to get their beef. But the rest of us will be healthier and happier.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like you know, as I've you know, tried to improve this area of my life recently, and I think you know, if you look at the data and, you know, health studies that have been done over time, and, you know, certainly environmental concerns are a big one, carbon concerns, it would do the world a lot of good if we ate less meat and consumed, you know, less animal products. Like, you don't have to all become vegans, but just doing less, that makes a big difference. You know, like, right now, especially beef, it's really, really comically inefficient for in terms of environmental stuff. But like, just eating less meat, not having it be like the bulk of every meal, goes a long way. That, you know, going back to Apple with leather, like, I think it's surprising that they still have it at all, because I don't think they actually are selling a huge quantity of leather. The phone cases, I think, are probably where they have the most of it. I don't imagine they're selling a ton of their like laptop pouches for $300 or their expensive leather watch bands. Like, they probably, most of the leather is probably just phone cases. And Apple's phone cases are nice, but they're also more expensive than the competition. And typically, most people don't want to spend the Apple price on their phone case. They usually buy some other case because it's cheaper. And so they're probably not selling a huge amount of leather. And so that's why it makes it even more curious why they keep doing it at all.
Oh, they got that partnership with Hermes, that's all leather stuff and fancy. I guess they even did the AirTags thing. Isn't that one leather too? Or
yeah, that's why it feels like they're just doing it for like high profit accessory sales.
Because it's fancy. Like, because that's why, I mean, same thing with cars. Like, why did the expensive ones have leather? Because it was fancier and it was better in many ways. And, you know, it felt more expensive, and that's why it was in the fancy cars. But like I said, even in the fancy cars, sometimes there is a performance characteristic that's more important than it being fancy. But Apple still seems to be hanging on it just because it's a fancy thing. Like how the 20th anniversary Mac had leather on the like trackpad area, right? It was the signal from the 80s on. I mean, it's always been, you know, a signal of fancy things in sort of the modern era or 20th century leather. But these days, I think the tide is turning, not because people care that much about animals, but just because we can make synthetic products at a reasonable price, especially for high-end goods. You can afford to use a more expensive material, and consumers can be and have been in many ways convinced that that is fancier. The same sort of cachet that comes with, well, I have an electric car, so I'm not polluting the environment or whatever. That is a thing that rich people can get behind and feel good about doing it. And it feels fancier to them to have an electric car than to have an internal combustion, because internal combustion feels old and Teslas are cool, right? And if that Tesla comes with an interior that's made from recycled golf balls or something, that's a thing that they can feel that, they feel fancier about that. They're like, oh, well, when their friends get into their cool car and their door handle pops out and the weird lights go all around the thing, they'll say, did you know this dashboard is made from recycled golf balls? Like, we're turning that corner now where to be the cool rich person thing doesn't have to be leather anymore. That can be eventually, we can turn it around where eventually that seems like a barbaric lower class thing, and you can sell the rich people the expensive thing. And in the beginning, the good alternatives are probably going to be more expensive than leather, but it trickles down, right? So I think we are slowly turning that corner. We can, especially in material science, where it's not things that people are eating. Getting people to eat less meat is going to be much more difficult, right? But in material science, we're working on that well. And like you said, Marco, on the eating stuff, we're making some headway there with the fake meats, not necessarily the lab-grown ones, but like the, Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger and all those other things. And fast food restaurants have that as an alternative. I personally think veggie burgers that don't even try to be like meat are better than the fake meat ones, but that's just me. I know some people like the other ones.
I used to agree with you.
Same.
Which one do you like?
I don't like Beyond. Beyond tastes like,
it smells like
somebody who has
terrible.
Beyond stuff. Beyond stuff is very much not for me. It tastes like meat designed by people who haven't tasted meat in a very long time.
Yeah, and my daughter's a vegetarian, and she likes Beyond the best. So don't take my word for it, but I personally don't like Beyond.
No, I'm a big fan of Impossible. Like I use the Impossible grounds whenever I make tacos, and because in that kind of situation, it's like, again,
it's mostly the sauce.
Yeah, it's mostly seasonings and accessories. So it's like if the quote meat tastes a little bit different, it's not even that different. But if it tastes a little bit different, nobody cares. Like, it's in the context of taco night, like, you're there for all the other stuff. The meat is mostly a delivery device for chili powder and salt. So you're not really there. It doesn't really matter, right? So I haven't made ground beef tacos in like over a year, because the value of the meat is not high enough to offset its costs to the world and to my mind, So that's an easy substitute, right? But for breakfast, I have just egg instead of scrambled eggs because it's healthier and I like the taste better in the way I make it. And there's other things like the Impossible grounds. They stay in the freezer for a long time really nicely. And I've so often I'll take out a pack of ground beef to make tacos in the past, and I'll make it and it'll smell kind of funny because maybe it wasn't very good to begin with or something, and I sometimes even have to throw it out because it smells like it's rotten or something. That's never happened with Impossible stuff. So it's just there's advantages like you don't have to feel weird when you're I hate having to deal with raw chicken and then having to wash everything, scrub everything down so hard afterwards and worry about all these bacterial infections.
Yeah, if you want to find a way to reduce your meat consumption, one thing that's worked for me was you keep talking about all these things with the ground beef, and I'm like, I very rarely have ground beef, or much less than I used to. Is shortly after I was first married and we were in our first place together, both my wife and I had at various times bouts of food poisoning that we attributed to ground beef that we just eaten, often in tacos or other dishes with ground beef. So eventually we just, right or wrong, I'm not saying this is true because very often people misattribute what gave them food poisoning. They just assume it's the last thing they ate, which is sometimes not the case because it takes a long time.
Yeah, a lot of times it's like the spinach that was on the burger or something.
Yeah, who knows? But anyway, for whatever reasons, both of us just got turned off to ground beef and just basically slowly but surely eliminated everything that we were eating that had ground beef in it, with the possible exception of hamburgers. And it was just because of bad experiences with food poisoning. And yeah, foodborne illnesses come on vegetables too. And so,
in all fairness, there's lots of reasons not to eat ground beef. It's really quite dark.
But I very rarely have hamburgers. I have hot dogs instead, which is not any better, I realize. But anyway, I just say this is how people change their diets. It's not, you eventually get to the point where the thing that you used to like starts to turn you off.
Yeah, that's where I am with a lot of this stuff.
And it's not, sometimes that can be unhealthy. You shouldn't really be grossed out by foods that there's nothing particularly gross about them. And my, experience of like misattributing food poisoning to ground beef is obviously not ideal. But all this is to say is if you think like, oh, I can't possibly live without insert food here, you'd be surprised how you can change over time. And it's, it doesn't become a thing that you have to work to do if you're just actually turned off by it and more turned on by some other food. Like it no longer becomes a thing that you have to make an effort to do.
Yeah, and I think again, like I think it's very important to think about this kind of stuff as, think when you are making a choice about food, consider things like the environmental cost more than we have in the past. And that's not to say like, if I go to a steakhouse, I'm going to get a filet mignon. I'm going to get a real steak and I'm going to eat it and I'm going to enjoy it.
I thought you said you're going to get a real steak. You said you're going to get a filet mignon. Which is it?
No, there it is.
No, the reason I go with fillets is that first of all, they're good and I don't care. And second of all, they're the smallest steak offered because I want to have the most room for sides. I don't want to have 16 ounces of cow in my stomach and blocking out all the other stuff from getting in. The whole reason to go to steakhouse is to get sides and stuff, and the steak is good too.
I disagree, but okay.
Anyway, but like, the point is like, it's important for, as we, in our climate realities that we're in and our environmental realities that we're in, it's important for people to realize like, okay, this type of thing is more costly to the world or morals or my own health in some way than these other choices I could make. And so obviously we're all humans. We like good things. We're going to get the unhealthy things sometimes, but if there are good alternatives that we can get other times, we should probably be doing a lot more of that than we have been doing.
Yeah, this is an interesting scenario. I just want to bring this up as you keep talking about making different personal choices. Unlike things like energy consumption, where it was an actual explicit strategy of fossil fuel companies to introduce the concept of a carbon footprint to make us all think that our individual personal choices about our recycling and living is the way to prevent global warming. It's basically just a way to distract people from saying, don't regulate us as fossil fuel companies. This will be solved by you making individual choices. There's no systemic change we should make. You should just be more careful and take shorter showers. That's the only way to save the world. That's a load of crap. Not to say that we shouldn't make individual choices that are good for the environment, just to say that is absolutely not the solution. The real solution is to regulate fossil fuel companies and actually care about climate change at a systemic level. That's the only way to fix it. And that's because individuals have very little control about how they get their energy. It's kind of like cable internet access, but worse. It's like if you don't want to use fossil fuels to heat your home, very often that is the only solution that is economically viable for you in your place at your income level, right? Not everyone can just like, I'm going to live in a solar home and everything's going to be, that's incredibly expensive, right? Sometimes all you can get is, you can get oil or natural gas, and you don't have control of that because there's these huge utilities and fossil fuel companies with huge subsidies from the government and blah, 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 right? But in the case of food, the only thing that can change the variety of the food we get are changes in demand, right? If nobody wants to eat mealworms, they're not going to spend, like 50% of the acreage of your country raising mealworms because nobody wants to eat them, right? Lots of people want to eat cows. They're going to use up a large portion of some land somewhere to raise those cows to sell to you. Your individual choices may not matter, but unlike the case with fossil fuel companies, it's not like you're going to be stuck in a situation where you say, well, I have to eat beef because it's the only thing I can buy. Now, it is true that things that are healthy tend to be more expensive. In America, you can get corn in everything. Everything you eat can be made of corn, right? Because it's subsidized and it's not that great for you.
Everything you wear can be made of corn. Yeah. Like your house can be made of corn.
Right. And so there is a systemic issue there, especially with the cost. Because if you want to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, it's way more expensive than just eating corn syrup and corn for everything, right? But en masse, like if we start eating less beef, that will cause less beef to be produced and so on and so forth. And there's no place where you live where you're like, even though there's no demand for beef, the beef manufacturers push it on us and it's the only food we can buy. That's true of corn, but not beef, right? So setting aside corn for now, which is technically a vegetable, it is mostly just a sugar delivery device. Changing our collective individual choices about how much meat we eat can't actually have a material influence on the food that is made, because over the centuries, the food that is made has been the food in some respects that is demanded by the people. Again, they gave the mealworm example because in this country, we tend not to eat a lot of insects, right? Which is why we don't manufacture a lot of insects for eating. But it's not because they're not good food and healthy and sustainable and economical or whatever. It's just because people in this country don't want to eat insects for the most part, right? That's the only reason, right? Whereas no matter how much you like or dislike natural gas and oil, And coal or whatever, it's freaking everywhere in this country because our individual choices can't change that because there's a huge infrastructure behind that. And wherever you live, it's not like you have a choice of 17 different kinds of electricity and heating in most cases. Maybe you have a choice of one or two.
But the Impossible Burger, if you haven't tried it, try it out. They sell a Whopper at Burger King. Actually, that reminds me.
Burger King sells it. A lot of places sell Impossible Burgers now, and you can in many U.S. grocery stores you can get the 1 pound like little squares of ground, quote beef, but Impossible meat. And that's we always keep a few of those in our freezer. It's great. It's again like for stuff like tacos, it's fine. Like I wouldn't have like a massive steak out of it. I think that might be a little bit weird, but and a whole other thing too is like meat substitutes are oftentimes not significantly healthier in certain metrics than meat. It's not like you can, because usually there's high amounts of oil and stuff in them.
There's just different kinds of fat and sugars and everything there.
Right, but what's nice is that they can help you not only like have a meat-like experience if you don't want to be eating meat, but also they feel like kind of a stepping stone in many ways to a more vegetable-heavy diet. Like they allow you to go from the traditional American diet more easily to like, hey, you know what? Maybe every meal doesn't have to have a big block of meat next to a big pile of dairy, like
cheese.
Maybe there is an alternative way to eat that's a lot healthier than this. And it's nice to have it be like a stepping stone on that way. You shouldn't be eating Impossible tacos every single night because you shouldn't be eating tacos every single night. And you shouldn't be eating like burgers every night either. And veggie burgers are not significantly better in certain metrics. But it's a good stepping stone on the way there. In the same way that really nice fake leather has been a good stepping stone in that area. And going back to where we were starting all this, I do think Apple should stop using leather because it's not that important to them, and there's lots of good alternatives, and there's lots of benefits to stop using it.
I feel like we're going to get someone writing in to tell us how much water almonds used in California and how it's starving out the rest of the state because for every almond you eat, there's like 10 bajillion gallons of water or whatever. And yes, lots of things can be grown unsustainably or in environmentally harmful ways.
Just don't ruin coconut for me. So many good things are made of coconut now. Just make if coconut is somehow horrible, please don't tell me.
We bought a whole coconut on a lark from the supermarket and we're very disappointed when it was completely rotten inside. That's sad.
That's a bummer. Hey, talking about the Impossible Burger and the Whopper reminded me of our friends at Fun Fact, where they put the follow-up at the end, which is unequivocally the wrong place for follow-up. And I tried to convince...
Like we follow any rules. It's all over this freaking show.
Well, so here we go. I've got some follow-out, as it turns out.
I tried to put it at the beginning, but it's an uphill battle.
But I would just like to say to our friends over at Fun Fact, Eric and Alan, that follow-up belongs at the beginning. Come on, get with the program. But anyways, they did a small segment on episode 52, which aired a few days ago, with regard to the origins of the word vamp, which I think I had kind of casually asked what the origin of that was, or maybe it was one of you guys, probably John, asked the origin of the word vamp, and they discussed that on episode 52. And I meant to mention that during follow-up, and I forgot. And so I'm putting it at the end, which is the wrong place for it. And also, I wanted to quickly congratulate our mutual friend, David Sparks, who has decided to shut down his law firm and go completely and utterly independent with Max Sparky and Max Sparky Labs. So we'll put a link in the show notes to check that out. And I just wanted to quickly put a shout out for him as well.
The question is, will he be getting more or less sleep now? I mean, I guess he won't be staying up night worrying about his clients if he read his posts, but doesn't. Maybe he'll be up all night making more of his guides and stuff.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, but I just wanted to say congratulations because I'm really excited for him.
Yeah, I love when friends go independent, Casey. It took you long enough, but you eventually got here.
Hey, well, it's we got to work on John now.
Oh, that's a lost cause. We're never going to get John.
It's so true.
Do you think we're going to get like worse feedback on telling people you should probably eat less meat than
people are fine with that.
Like, what do you think is more dangerous to say on a podcast, like that or like tabs versus spaces?
We're just going to get the one person is going to send us a thing about almonds, but then they're going to hear me talk about it maybe later and feel bad.
Almonds are overrated.
It's not just almonds. There's lots of things that water. If you live in a desert state and they redirect a lot of your water for agriculture, people are going to be angry about whatever you're redirecting to. Yeah, don't grow almonds in the freaking desert by sucking all the water away from the one river in your state. But that's more of a California problem than an almond problem, I feel like.
Also, almond milk is overrated. Coconut milk is awesome.
Oh yeah, I heard the top 4.
Yeah, well, I don't particularly like coconut though, so I drink almond milk because I don't like coconut.
I don't like coconut flavored things or like those like crunchy toasted coconut bits that are in some candies.
I'm going to say you don't like coconut because you're the one who didn't like the toasted coconut because you felt it was chewing on like little fibers. That's the whole good thing about coconut. So I feel like you don't like coconut. If you don't like that, you don't like coconut.
You have no idea how much coconut I consume. Trust me, I like coconut.
But who was the one? Maybe it was Tiff who didn't like the little crunchy, like stringy bits.
There's lots of different. I mean, look, earlier today, John, you bought a whole coconut and you cut it open, and I'm sure that process sucked. And then inside you couldn't eat it, right? The coconut is the one remaining thing I will defend as worth getting pre-cut at the grocery store.
Well, I mean, it needs to be cut, dried, shredded, and toasted. Then we're on to something.
No, Whole Foods sell, I'm sure other grocery stores sell, cut up chunks of coconut meat.
I don't like that. No, I need it to be dried, shredded, and toasted.
Well, that's different. That's a whole different food. Because
it's a coconut. That's the way. That's the good way for to have.
People in the chat are saying coconut oil. Coconut oil is fine for certain things. No, but
for anything.
I like coconut chunks and I like coconut milk. Those and not when I say coconut milk, I'm talking about like the Thai kind, like where it's like the ingredients are coconut and water. Not like the in a big bowling pin shaped bottle, and it's like this is some coconut along with blended with some almonds and also blended with a bunch of like gums and salts and preservatives. No, that's not. I'm talking about coconut and water in a solution. Like that is coconut milk, and it's really good in lots of things, including by itself sometimes. And those coconut chunks I also like. Even coconut water can be delicious, although it's usually pretty sugary. I don't get a lot of that. But
do you like coconut on like a what is it, like the German chocolate cake? Is that the one that has the coconut in the icing?
That is the one, and no.
Do you like Mounds or Almond Joy?
No.
See, I'm going to say you don't like coconut because that is the quintessential.
Yeah, I'm kind of coming around to John on this one.
I love Mounds, Almond Joy, and whatever that cake is.
Almond Joy's got nuts. Mounds don't.
I sang that song to my kids. I'm saying, why does everyone my age know the song? Because it was an ad on TV, and in case I think they said they were confused about which one had the almonds. I'm like, I'm not confused. In fact, let me sing you a song. And then of course I had to go find it on YouTube. It's like in different versions.
Oh, great example of what I was just saying about coconut stuff and food stuff. So tonight for dinner, I made butternut squash soup. Now, I wanted like a good protein source. And so I use chicken bone broth as like the broth base because that's a fantastic protein source, especially if you're trying to be somewhat healthy. Yeah, it's chicken based, but that's one thing where like vegan options don't really have a good like protein heavy broth. That's not really available yet, as far as I know. If you know otherwise, please tell me. But instead of using cream as you would traditionally use in butternut squash soup, I used a bit of coconut cream, which is basically the coconut version of heavy cream, like in a can. It's weird. It comes in these little skinny cans, but I use coconut cream instead, and you couldn't tell any difference at all.
Yeah, when you're baking with stuff, like we have so many milk alternatives, and half the time when I'm baking things, I would just substitute something for the milk, and no one can ever tell.
Right. Like there's so many contexts where we use animal stuff that we don't really need to. Like that, it's not really making a big difference whether we use it or not.
This is a case very often, though, where milk actually is cheaper than the fancy milks, especially because the fancy milks are for fancy people. And so sometimes getting almond milk or coconut milk or whatever is way more expensive than getting actual milk.
Oh yeah, and that's a whole different issue as well. Obviously, that has to be considered, and of course, there's the issue of like how various farm subsidies make certain things way cheaper than they naturally would be.
Yeah, that's what we're going to get. People are going to say, "You think meat isn't subsidized?" Yes, all the things that are bad for us are subsidized.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Milk is like suspiciously cheap. If you don't care about getting like organic milk, if you just get like any milk, it is like weirdly cheap. Eggs too,
I mean, the thing, and milk is like, I'm not putting down milk. I love regular milk, and it is a good, cheap, healthy food that you don't need to kill the animals for. It doesn't mean that animals aren't treated terribly the way we milk them, but that can be improved. Like I feel like milk and butter and stuff like that is the type of thing where it is possible to have a world in which we get butter and milk in a way that is not cruel to animals, and that still is also very cheap and makes good use of land. Or like that's the type of thing. It's like a renewable resource type of food product. And the alternatives, almond milk, coconut milk, all those other alternatives, often have more sugar added and lots of artificial things, and are expensive to make and produce, and are expensive to buy. So I feel like there's definitely still a gap there.
Oh, totally.
Although more people are lactose intolerant these days, so that could solve itself with demand based on lactose intolerance.
Yeah, totally. And as you mentioned, there are certainly a lot of asterisks on the like, well, it's better for the animals. Yes, it's better than killing them, but there is still a lot of area for improvement in that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Especially anything involving chickens.